In 2022, scientists discovered what could be the first known predator in the animal kingdom. Celebrating its 560 millionth birthday, it lived during the Ediacaran, the period preceding the Cambrian. It is an aurora lumina, Attenborough. I guess it's not exactly your idea of a predator. It doesn't have the physical features of a dangerous, aggressive animal. Yet scientists believe it to be one of the earliest predators known to man. Judging by its flame-shaped tentacles, the animal is probably a member of the Cnidarian family. Today this group includes animals such as jellyfish, coral, and sea anemones. They appeared when life began to explode in the oceans. To regulate and create an initial balance, a predator was needed. The predator-prey cycle could then be established, fostering and maintaining the very first terrestrial ecosystem to hatch. The predators that await us are nothing like Aurora lumina Attenborough. If the animals at the bottom of the chain are evolving, as in the case of filter feeders, suspension feeders, and herbivores, so too are piscivores and carnivores. Predators adapt to the prey they hunt. It's time for us to begin our journey through time to the very first prehistoric predator in our series. It lived in the marine territories of the Cambrian. We're in the middle of the ocean, over 500 million years ago. If we leave the aurora lumina and change predators, we're once again faced with aquatic predators, and with good reason. At that time, no animal had yet set foot on land. The continent knew neither predators nor prey. Even vegetation had yet to conquer this hostile environment. On land, the landscape is desolate. Time seems to stand still. No life on the horizon. Nothing. Only rocks, dust, and scorching heat. No one could survive down here. In the ocean, however, everything is different. Water is synonymous with life, and it's not for nothing that we begin with this period. It was during this period that a major event took place, the Cambrian explosion. A sudden appearance on a geological timescale of around 10 million years of almost all the major organizational plans known today. It's still in its infancy, but its richness is already widely visible. Look around you. The ocean is teeming with life. This is the home of the Anomalocaris, whose name means strange shrimp. It's a large marine arthropod. Far from being as impressive as the great white shark or the orca, it is nonetheless the Cambrian sea monster. Our Anomalocaris is just under a meter long. While its size is respectable, it's not its main hunting asset. What makes it the alpha predator of the Cambrian seas is its mouth. As you can see, it's equipped with sharp bony plates that have the ability to crush its prey with disconcerting ease. But before we delve a little deeper into this fine hunter's modus operandi, let's take a look at his physical portrait. As I was saying, Anomalocaris means strange shrimp. It's aptly named, to say the least. It's an arthropod, in other words, a segmented invertebrate. Its eyes are rod-shaped, like many of today's insects. It already has well-developed eyes, even though we're still in the early stages of biological evolution. They are made up of facets. It also has swimming legs. This is what enables it to move in water. Last but not least, and perhaps most impressive of all, after its mouth, it has gripping appendages, bristling with spikes. This physical singularity enables it to seize its prey and never let go. Now that we've described its most attractive physical features, I think it's time for you to see it in action. When he's on the move, it's usually because his body is driven by hunger. That's when they go in search of prey. It's a veritable trilobite crusher. Trilobites abounded in the oceans during the Cambrian period. They came in all sizes. The Paleozoic is the golden age of these marine animals. Most trilobites measured just a few centimeters. However, a few species could reach 60 to 70 centimeters. Over 18,000 species evolved during the Paleozoic. They occupied many ecological niches, from the littoral zone to the deep sea. Most moved by walking on the seabed, others dug galleries, while others swam freely in water columns. These animals, widely present in the world's seas and oceans, were the Anomalocaris' main source of nutrition, even if it occasionally ate other marine species. Thanks to its spiked appendages, it could seize a trilobite and bring it easily to its mouth. Then, like a camera shutter, it would open wide and crush the trilobite with its many plates. Its appendages and mouth are formidable weapons, but it's important to look at its eyes too. Indeed, recent discoveries have demonstrated its great visual capacity. Anomalocaris had highly developed eyes. The eye is our main organ of communication with the outside world, and it's a complex one. In many predators, it is also an asset for hunting. This is precisely the case with the Anomalocaris. Its eyes were about 2 to 3 centimeters, 1 inch, long, with 16,000 facets known as ommatidia. These are light-sensitive receptors. Many insects have faceted eyes, as does the Anomalocaris, but the difference lies in the number of facets. By way of comparison, the fly has 4,000 facets. The dragonfly, on the other hand, is an excellent hunter, with almost 28,000 facets. The Anomalocaris, with its 16,000 ommatidia, has exceptional vision, making it a formidable hunter. As we mentioned earlier in our journey among prehistoric superpredators, alpha predators played an essential role in the regulation and evolution of species. According to scientists, the presence of this unrivaled hunter in the oceans could be at the origin of the Cambrian explosion. By exerting strong selection pressure, it may have contributed to the major diversification of animal species. But he's not the only one to reap the rewards of this formidable diversification of marine fauna. Another great Cambrian predator is Hurdia victoria. As you'll see, it's very similar to Anomalocaris. The study of several hundred Canadian fossils has given researchers a better idea of Hurdia and its position in the Anomalocaridae family, animals renowned for their relatively large size and well-toothed mouths. Their hunting prowess earned them the nickname Cambrian T-Rex. Just imagine how fearsome they could have been. Like the Anomalocaris, the head carries a pair of small spiked limbs. These are spiny claws of a sort. The animal uses them to bring prey to its mouth. The lateral lobes have large gills for breathing. It also has a hollow, spiky shell protruding from the front of its head. Shells are generally used to preserve and protect certain organs. In the Hurdia victoria, however, this is not the case. Scientists therefore set out to unravel the mystery of this famous shell and discover more about the animal's lifestyle. According to the most recent studies, no organs were found inside the shell. Nevertheless, the shell was useful for the Hurdia, enabling it to stay afloat more easily by controlling its buoyancy. Thanks to this ability, he could explore the seabed with greater ease and hunt down the many prey species around him. Like the Anomalocaris, it too had a mouth armed with plates. The Hurdia, on the other hand, was smaller, averaging 20 centimeters or 8 inches. It also had slightly finer appendages than the Anomalocaris. As a result, it didn't step on the toes of its predatory counterpart and fed on smaller animals, but it was still a great hunter and an alpha predator because no other animal hunted it. While fauna and flora exploded in the Cambrian and became increasingly diverse, prey remained much the same, as did their predators. These two were undoubtedly the rulers of the seas at the time. But in a few million years' time, other predators will enter the scene. It's already time for you to meet them and take a leap back in time. We're off to the Ordovician and Silurian eras. One of the earliest known Eurypterids, Megalosaurus, lived during the Upper Ordovician. It became a super predator of the Ordovician and Silurian seas alongside other animals of the same ilk, such as Pterygotus. Related horseshoe crabs appeared a little later and still live in the oceans. Megalosaurus and Pterygotus are often referred to as sea scorpions. They are indeed scorpion-like, but these Eurypterids were much bigger than any scorpions you've ever seen. The first, Megalosaurus, measured 1 meter or 3 feet. The second, Pterygotus, was close to 1.60 meters, and even 1.75 meters for the largest specimens. If they're a little frightening at first sight, rest assured, there's absolutely nothing to risk if you get a little closer. They will give us the opportunity to learn more about their morphology, and therefore their hunting methods. Their bodies are divided into 2 parts, the front and the back. The front part, called the prosoma, consists of the Eurypterid's head. Both Megalosaurus and Pterygotus have a pair of chelicerae on the head, close to the mouth and ending in 2 hooks, as well as pedipalps. A pedipalp is a kind of flexible forceps. These are used for eating. The rear part, also known as the opisthosom, is made up of several bands known as tergites. Tergites are the hardened plate-like segments of an arthropod. This characteristic is also found in other species. The opisthosom, the rear part of the animal, ends in a point called the telson. It's hard to say whether the telson was venomous. Several hypotheses have been put forward. One of them suggests an attack-based predation tool, like a spike or spear, to block prey and then bring it to the mouth without resorting to any venom. Pterygotus was the largest of all Eurypterids at the time, but also one of the largest of all known arthropods. Carnivorous, it fed on Brontoscorpio, the oldest known scorpion, measuring nearly 1 meter or 3 feet in adulthood, and Cephalaspis, one of the first agnathic fish, vertebrates that did not yet have jaws. It has 4 pairs of legs to get around. A 5th pair is more like flippers. These enabled it to swim. It is probable that its tail was used to gain speed when it wanted to swoop down on prey. Thanks to its large pincers, it could grasp animals and hold them firmly to prevent them escaping. But thanks to his exceptional eyesight, he was quick enough to ensure that this rarely happened. According to some analyses, Pterygotus may have had 2 pairs of eyes. The larger eyes were faceted, like some insects, such as flies and dragonflies, but also like the Anomalocaris we met earlier. The other pair of eyes, smaller this time, would be located in the center of its head. To have such well-developed eyesight, this ability must have been invaluable when hunting. This is an animal that relies on its vision. It uses its eyesight to find its way around animals. Not all sea scorpions were blessed with such impressive size. They were the delight of a mollusk. But not just any mollusk. This one belongs to the class of cephalopods. To be more precise, it's a nautiloid genus. When we think of mollusks, we rarely think of a large predator, I grant you. Yet this one looks like a giant squid, and its size is clearly an advantage when hunting. According to estimates, its shell measures between 6 meters or 20 feet long. The giant orthocone cephalopod, a Cambrian Trentonese, fed on prey equal to its energy requirements. Trilobites, but also certain sea scorpions offered it choice dishes. Using his tentacles, he was able to seize his prey and only release them once they had sunk to the bottom of his enormous mouth. As you'll see, this giant, Orthoceron, is far from the only one to adopt such impressive dimensions. Although the seabed is an idyllic landscape, we're going to have to leave this jewel of the oceans behind. The Silurian period is drawing to a close, and the Devonian is opening its doors to us. You'll soon realize that the apex predators are very different from what we've seen so far. Their size is much greater. Their morphology and anatomy are different, allowing them to set up a new hunting model. Alpha predators are far more dangerous and aggressive. Let's take a look at one of the largest predators of the Devonian period, the placoderm, Dunkleosteus. It grows to around 4 meters in length and weighs almost 1 ton. Dunkleosteus is monstrous compared to previous alpha predators we've come across along the way. But size isn't its only peculiarity. Its body is completely covered in bony plates, like a cuirass, protecting it from all dangers. It's a veritable suit of armor that would stop any other aquatic animal in its tracks. This famous armor and its extraordinary dimensions place it at the top of the chain. It's an apex predator. His imposing size and weight did not make him a fast fish in the sea, but he was nevertheless at the top of the food chain because he feared no one. No animal could overcome his armor. Its mouth is devoid of teeth. Quite surprising for a large predator, don't you think? But a toothless animal doesn't mean it's devoid of destructive weapons. It does, however, have a very effective jaw. It opens and closes like a chisel, blade against blade, and is very sharp. Dunkleosteus feed on all shellfish living in the ocean at the time. Thanks to their jaws, they can easily crush shells, eating cephalopods with unparalleled ease. If their jaws of knife-sharp bone plates aren't enough, they use the enormous force of pressure their mouths are capable of exerting on their prey. Now we'll take a look at another animal, also a fish, whose strength is just as astonishing. Here we have a Stethacanthus productus. It's nicknamed the anvil shark because of its brush-like dorsal fin. Before we talk about its hunting qualities, let's start by explaining how it defends itself. Thanks to its characteristics, no other predator dares attack it. Stethacanthus is a genus of primitive Holocephalus. It was one of the very first cartilaginous fish to appear on Earth. It quickly conquered both the salt and fresh waters of our planet. At the top of its skull, you can see that it has numerous dermal denticles. These serve to repel any predators that might have risked an unequal fight. It also has pectoral whips at the base of its pectoral fins. Again, these are formidable defensive weapons that he would not hesitate to use if necessary. Thanks to its size and power, it can take on large animals. It used to feed on primitive amphibians. Over time, it gave birth to a new species, the Anomalocaris zangerli. Its descendant lived in the Carboniferous period and, like its predecessor, enjoyed primitive amphibians. He also hunted an animal whose classification still remains a mystery to scientists, somewhere between fish and tetrapods, the Crocodilian genus Scoticus. Each of these alpha predators feeds on a specific species, so they don't really compete and they don't hunt each other. They reign supreme in all the world's waters. The Anomalocaris gives us the opportunity to talk about the Carboniferous. What do you say we go there right now? Other equally interesting animals are already waiting for us there. The further back we go in time, the more predators we find. They follow the curve of biological evolution and the diversification of species for which they are largely responsible. Thanks to their regulatory work, they enrich and maintain healthy biodiversity on land and at sea. Their morphology, physical capacities, and hunting methods are adapted to the species they hunt. Until now, prey has tended to be small or medium-sized, such as trilobites, cephalopods, and small fish. Times are changing, and many new species have emerged. Alpha predators have modeled their evolution on that of their prey. You'll soon realize that the further back in time we go, the more spectacular these prehistoric predators will become. Another notable change is where they live. Until recently, predators were confined to the aquatic environment, but this is no longer the case. Predators feed on animals, so they live wherever life is found. Over the last few million years, predators have managed to establish themselves on the continent too. So, it was only natural that an alpha predator should also reign on the mainland. Those awaiting us now are fascinating, but also terribly frightening. The first of these is chilling. This is the Helicoprion. I don't need to tell you what's so special about him. As you can see, his circular, saw-like lower jaw is quite incredible. Extraordinary, even. You'd think it came straight out of a science fiction story. And yet, the Helicoprion did exist. In fact, it was one of the most fearsome marine predators of its time. For a long time, it was a mystery to us humans. It's hard to perceive reality, to establish a general truth, to attest a fact so long after the fact, and with so few traces to rely on. One thing is certain. The Helicoprion is a cartilaginous fish, and it's precisely for this reason that creating a portrait as close to reality as possible is a tricky business. Unlike skeletal bones, cartilage does not fossilize, so you have to pick up on the few clues present in the remains of the past and then interpret. The first observations and interpretations based on the fossils of the Helicoprion, of which only the spiral dentition has survived the ravages of time, have long been the subject of debate. Scientists imagine this circular, saw-like structure, a sort of prehensile toothed organ, on the lower jaw, then on the upper jaw, and a little later on the dorsal fin, and even the caudal fin. In the end, according to the most recent research supported by technology, the most likely hypothesis places this unusual dentition on the lower part of the jaw. The scientists' observations and interpretations go even further, describing it as occupying the entire length of the mandibles without being prominent. In fact, according to their research, a frontal and external position, as implied by the first descriptions, would have been a hindrance for the animal. Water resistance would have been too great for it to survive so many years and take over the oceans. This giant of the seas, measuring nearly 10 meters or 30 feet, had no predators. It was at the top of the chain, feeding on fish or ammonites, depending on the hypothesis. Here again, time is not on our side. For the moment at least, it's hard to say whether one of these diets is more plausible than another. If he was indeed feeding on ammonites, then he was using that circular saw as a can opener, a machine for exploding shells and scrambling those shell-bound animals. The teeth are indeed perfectly suited to this kind of exercise. It's also possible that the Helicoprion used a different method of hunting, lying in wait for schools of fish. It would then pounce on them, opening its mouth wide. This time, the circular saw would have acted as a rotating skewer, on which the fish would have been skewered one after the other, to be taken further and further into the shark's mouth. Death is quick and painless. The fish are sheared off, then dragged backward in just a few handfuls of seconds. We'll have to leave this aquatic phenomenon with its saw-like jaws to keep our next appointment. Dimetrodon is waiting for us. The Dimetrodon is exceptionally large. It could reach 4 meters or 13 feet in length, and up to 6 meters or 20 feet in height for the largest adults. It weighs up to 250 kilograms or 550 pounds. Make no mistake, despite appearances, this Dimetrodon is not a dinosaur, but a reptile of the therapsid family. We're in the Permian, and remember, dinosaurs will arrive millions of years later. Now back to Dimetrodon. This species is often mentioned when talking about prehistoric animals. Its distinctive dorsal veil is undoubtedly a factor. However, it's not for this feature, which was very useful for regulating its temperature, that we're going to study it now, but for its status in the food chain. As you may have guessed, there's no need to drag out the suspense any longer, since that's the theme of this video. He's at the top of the food chain and one of the alpha predators. Its dentition will be the subject of our new study. Its name means 2 sizes of teeth. This gives you a little clue to the evolution of this species. The teeth on his skull are in fact of 2 different series. This makes him the precursor of the 4 types of mammalian teeth. 1 or 2 pairs of canine-like teeth are found in related members of this family. It also has a type of incisor. Another noteworthy feature of its dentition is the serrations on almost all its teeth. They appear so fine as to be mere cracks. These serve to make the teeth much sharper, enabling them to cut through the flesh of their prey. If its dentition has adapted, it is to attack a new kind of prey. The number of tetrapods and amphibians exploded during this period, and for some time already. An adversary to match these new animals was needed. To complete this armada of hunters, Dimetrodon also had olfactory epithelium in its nasal cavity, i.e. a layer of tissue that detects odors. Dimetrodon was probably able to use this sensory advantage to locate and flush out its prey. It feeds mainly on riverbanks and in shallow waters in search of amphibians, but also small fish. Although undoubtedly terrestrial, the Dimetrodon was not yet fully adapted to walking. It undulated more than it walked. Another super predator, the Lycanops, used much less energy to move, and moved with greater ease. Its name probably suggests a wolf-like appearance, and you're right to allude to it. Indeed, his name means wolf's face, and his physique denotes some lupine traits. Like the Dimetrodon, it too has a differentiation of teeth, but its most impressive feature is its enormous saber-shaped canine. It hints at what an implacable predator he was. This Gorgonopsian therapsid moved around on all fours. Unlike the animal we met earlier, the humerus and femur are virtually vertical. In other words, it walks. But that's not all. Lycanops also has a larger, more efficient musculature. This musculature, combined with its long legs on the underside of the body, rather than on the side, also enabled it to run. Speed was therefore perhaps one of its best hunting assets. He wasn't very tall, measuring just 1 meter or 3 feet in length. He was small in size compared to other herbivores and carnivores of the same period. However, it could run faster and had more stamina. Its impressive canines promised a quick, efficient kill that left nothing to chance. That's what put him in a position of strength. Hunter, but never hunted. On land and at sea, alpha predators watch over the balance of the cycle of life. They may be scary, aggressive, and even barbaric, but they're far less so than the next ones on our list. Come with me. We're meeting at Trias. We couldn't have wished for a better entry into the Jurassic than this meeting with the god of the seas. He is extraordinary. Despite his sea monster appearance, he captivates and fascinates mankind. This marine reptile is a fish eater. In other words, it feeds on fish. Its enormous wingspan gives you an idea of the size of the prey it feeds on. As we pointed out earlier, predators adapt to the prey they feed on. Their regulatory role is essential. Biological evolution facilitates the maintenance of this balance. We're living in an age of extraordinarily large animals. Predators are therefore also very imposing animals, and do justice to the size of their meal. The Liopleurodon is without a doubt the most advanced of the Pliosaurs. It is fearsome and very fast. It is one of the greatest predators of the Jurassic period. It can travel long distances, propelling itself through the water with its powerful front flippers. Its size, initially estimated at 25 meters or 80 feet, has been revised downwards in recent years. Finding the complete skeleton of a prehistoric animal is almost unheard of. After millions of years, only minute traces of their passage remain. Precious, priceless treasures. But these witnesses to a bygone age are far too small to establish with any certainty a completely realistic portrait. As we saw earlier, When we set out in search of answers about the distant past, we have to rely on the few elements found, then interpret and try to make deductions. Thanks to today's techniques, many mysteries can be solved, but mistakes are always possible. As the size of the head was disproportionately large, scientists were quick to point to an equally imposing body. Body and head are generally proportional. This is indeed the case for a very large number of species, but not in Pliosaurs. That doesn't make it any less gigantic. Right before your eyes, it's an animal of over 7 meters or 23 feet that moves with spine-chilling ease. Its attitude in the water and its sweeping movements are striking. It seems to be able to fly on the open sea. His predatory instincts awakened, he propels himself through the ocean with a flick of his flippers, reaching a speed far greater than his weight and size would suggest. Often mistakenly categorized as a dinosaur, it is in fact a marine reptile. It is also sometimes confused with pliosaurs, which have long necks characteristic of their species. Pliosaurs, or pliosauroids, are reptiles with more massive heads. With its massive skull, our marine specimen is one of the pliosaurs. In fact, Dimetrodon is the perfect example of a pliosaur. A long, flattened skull, a relatively short neck, and long fins attached to a thick torso, ending in a small tail. The animal's teeth are sharp as knives, making them devastatingly sharp. They're also very long, and rival a dinosaur you know well, the T-Rex. With teeth like that and a weight approaching 2 tons, Dimetrodon was the ruler of the seas. He left nothing to chance. When he passed, chaos ensued. Fierce and dangerous, he had an insatiable appetite. How do you think this extraordinary predator managed to flush out his prey? Its size was both an advantage and a hindrance when hunting. Fish could see him coming from a distance and flee to protect themselves. You have to look at its snout to discover the answer. The front nostrils give it an extremely well-developed sense of smell, enabling it to locate prey over long distances. To do this, it channels water through its nostrils to detect the chemical secretions of surrounding animals. When a tantalizing scent is detected, it pounces on its prey with its paddle-like fins. They literally propel him through the water. He can also go at top speed if the hunt calls for it. There's another thing you need to know about this emblematic animal of the Jurassic oceans, and it's closely linked once again to its nostrils. I'm talking about its respiratory system. Although it was an aquatic animal, it couldn't breathe underwater. Like some marine animals, notably the dolphin you know so well, it had to come to the surface to take a breath of oxygen before being able to dive back to the ocean floor. Dimetrodon may have had its moments of glory, but nothing in nature is ever immutable. Life evolves, and so does everyone's position in the cycle. Despite its hunting prowess, the mosasaurs, a new species of large reptiles, managed to oust the Dimetrodon during the Cretaceous period. We'll have a chance to meet them later on in our journey. Before we enter this new Cretaceous period, we have many other apex predator species to observe. Let's get back on the road. We've got a date with the next one on the list. Meet Nothosaurus. He had a slender body, elongated neck and tail, and long limbs. Not as good a swimmer. As the Pliosaurs and Plesiosaurs, it was able to cope well enough in the water to flush out prey and easily meet its energy needs. Biological evolution enabled it to develop certain skills. Its palate was closed, separating the nasal passage from the oral cavity. This adaptation facilitated the ingestion of food, even when the animal was submerged in water. His skull was long and flattened, with large openings. It enabled it to swallow large prey. Its jaws were studded with sharp interlocking teeth. No animal could escape. When swimming, Nothosaurus used its tail to propel itself, and its webbed feet to steer and stabilize itself in the water. He moved by undulating his body and moving his limbs. It hunted slowly towards its prey, then accelerated sharply over the last few meters to propel its head through schools of fish and capture prey. Although it hunted ferociously in the water, it was not an exclusively aquatic animal. We might compare it to today's seals. Nothosaurus are very good hunters in the ocean, but they regularly return to the shore to rest, perhaps to mate, and also to lay their eggs. Another animal of the same genus lived in swampy regions. This is the Tylosaurus. It looks very much like a crocodile. It was 1 meter or 3 feet high, and around 3 meters or 10 feet high. Its limbs were positioned directly under its body, almost vertically, so it walked on all fours. But this quadruped, unlike others of the same era, was quite fast. It has a complex ankle joint and a kind of heel. The latter is an important feature. In fact, a tendon attached to the heel is connected to the calf, and this makes all the difference. It increases leverage and thus facilitates movement. Not only can it walk with ease on land, it can also run. That's a major advantage when it comes to surprising and hunting new prey. Its body is equipped for both attack and defense. He has nothing to fear from animals interacting with the same ecosystem as he does. He was equipped with effective protective armor. Its entire body, including its belly, was covered with thick bony plates called scutes. They formed a veritable suit of armor. Let's continue our journey with the Phytosaurs. They too have much to teach us. Phytosaurs resemble crocodiles in silhouette. Despite this deceptive appearance, they are not crocodiles. Their nostrils, for example, are not located at the tip of the snout, but higher up in front of the eyes. This characteristic enabled them to conceal their presence. They could breathe while remaining almost submerged, leaving only the nostril hole and the tip of the skull protruding out of the water. There were 2 main types of Phytosaur. They can be distinguished by their jaws. First, there were those with long, narrow jaws lined with conical teeth. These were sharp and interlocked to grip fish firmly. This tooth arrangement is often found in underwater predators. There's a reason for this. They can plant a fish and grasp it firmly while flushing out the water from the sides of the mouth before swallowing. The other group includes Phytosaurs with short, wide, and very powerful jaws. The front teeth are fang-like, and the rear teeth bladed. The fang-like teeth protrude from the mouth, while the back teeth are curved. Thanks to this type of jaw, as well as its predatory physique, this Phytosaur was able to attack large land-dwelling tetrapods when they came to drink at the waterhole, in the manner of today's crocodilians. From these early encounters, you might think that the biggest predators of the time inevitably had the appearance of a crocodile. No, the next one on the list looks nothing like a crocodile, but I can assure you, he's just as scary as they come. Here's one of the most ferocious carnivores the Earth has ever known. Everything about him exudes violence and barbarity. He's equipped with the finest hunting weapons. His body is voluminous, measuring around 9 to 10 meters or 33 feet long, almost 3 meters or 10 feet high, and weighing no less than 2 tons. Its sheer mass is frightening enough to scare off even the most reckless of dinosaurs. Its bones are heavy and strong. Its legs are long and its front legs shorter. It moves with confidence on its hind legs alone. Its long tail, undulating from left to right, acts as a pendulum, helping it to maintain balance during its movements. Its well-developed musculature and articulations enable it to be quite fast when compared to other dinosaurs of the same era. Fossilized footprints confirm this hypothesis. We are therefore dealing with a fast predator. Its front and rear legs are equipped with sharp claws. They don't hesitate to use them to lacerate the flesh of their prey and cause serious injuries. As if such claws weren't enough for Megalosaurus, they're not its only weapons. It has powerful jaws lined with large, razor-sharp, curved teeth. They're real cutthroats. It can slice, tear, and devour its prey with incredible violence. He's so formidable he'll stop at nothing. It never shudders or runs away. It even attacks large sauropods. Megalosaurus was a dangerous and fearsome carnivore. As you can see, this one attacks a Bonthriospondylis. Unfortunately for the Bonthriospondylis, it soon passes from life to death. This scene takes us out of the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous. This is undoubtedly the era that saw the most appalling predators of all time. I hope your heart's in the right place. These animals are dangerous, aggressive, and violent. After their passage, the landscape is synonymous with chaos. There's nothing left but the scent of fear and the acrid smell of blood. The greatest predators of all time were undoubtedly Carcharodontosaurus, Gigantosaurus, T-Rex, and Spinosaurus. Spinosaurus seems to be the most imposing of them all. Carcharodontosaurus outstrips Gigantosaurus and T-Rex itself. Let's meet each of them and learn more about their species. How did they rise to the top of the food chain? What were their hunting skills? What makes them apex predators? There's only one way to find out. Meet them and study them up close. Faster, bigger, but less intelligent than the T-Rex, the Gigantosaurus made a name for itself in the Cretaceous. It weighed around 10 tons and measured almost 15 meters or 50 feet in length. There is some speculation that this giant lizard could have taken on titanic herbivores such as Argentinosaurus. Bones of this mastodon have indeed been found close to Gigantosaurus. A predator-prey relationship is therefore plausible. Even so, it's hard to imagine that an animal weighing just 10 tons, however ferocious and powerful, could rival the 80 tons of this gigantic herbivore. One possibility that could explain and confirm this predator-prey relationship would be a pack hunting style. Gigantosaurus probably formed very small groups, limited to 2 or 3 individuals, and gathered only to hunt. This is one of the first animals on our list to rely on the power and efficiency of the group to hunt. Others, just as dangerous, acted alone, but they were no less formidable for all that. Meet the Carcharodontosaurus. It has phenomenal strength. It measures between 12 and 13 meters, or 40 feet according to the latest estimates, and weighs between 6 and 8 tons. Its disproportionate size and power make it an outstanding hunter and a sovereign predator on its home turf. His femur alone measures 1 meter, 26 or 4 feet. Can you imagine? Just one part of his leg was the size of an 8-year-old child. He hunted a wide variety of species, even large herbivores, without fear. He was so feared that he would even steal prey freshly hunted by other predators. None of them would have risked combat to recover their property. His posture and charisma alone frightened any terrestrial creature that crossed his path, even from a distance. His insatiable appetite, aggressive nature, and dangerousness were known to all. Look at its mouth, it's gigantic. She's 1 meter 60, or 5 feet long, the average height of a 14-year-old teenager. But it's also a formidable weapon. Her teeth are sharp and razor sharp. Given the size of her skull, you can imagine that her teeth are also very long, over 15 centimeters or 6 inches. Each of his teeth is almost the size of a human hand. Look at yours. Imagine dozens of teeth as long as that, solid as rock and sharp as an axe. No animal could resist a Carcharodontosaurus bite. Despite its extraordinary abilities, over time it gave way to another alpha predator, undoubtedly more intelligent and better adapted to its environment, the Tyrannosaurus rex. Did you know that the first Tyrannosaurus appeared around 140 million years ago, barely larger than a human? Such was the case of Nanosaurus hoglundae. But towards the end of the Cretaceous, tens of millions of years later, they began to evolve into animals resembling the T-Rex you know. He is undoubtedly one of the most popular dinosaurs. When we think of the dinosaur period, it's often his name that springs to mind. It's also well known for its ferocity. In fact, its aggressiveness, violence, and insatiable predatory instincts have earned it the name of king of the tyrant reptiles. It could easily reach a length of 12 to 14 meters, or 43 feet, a height of 5 to 6 meters, or 16 feet, and a weight flirting with 7 tons. Like the previous dinosaurs we studied, it had a large skull, up to 1.50 meters long, or 5 feet. Armed with some 60 teeth, 10 to 15 centimeters, or 4 inches long, some as long as 18 centimeters or 7 inches, perfectly sharpened, and saber-sharp, its mouth could have swallowed a whole man without difficulty. They were always effective, and hardly ever wore out. Every 2 to 6 years, a new army of razor-sharp teeth sprang from its jaws. Some paleontologists also believe that the unusually large cranial surfaces behind the Tyrannosaurus's eyes must have housed extremely powerful chewing muscles. In addition to its teeth and powerful jaws, Tyrannosaurus had many other assets that put it right at the top of the podium among the world's greatest predators. He has stereoscopic vision. In other words, he has relief vision and a very good sense of distance. Each of his eyes provides a clear image at a certain viewing angle. Taken together and superimposed, these images provide the depth needed to assimilate distances. This also enabled him to register the slightest movement with a fairly wide field of vision, For a predator, this kind of visual capacity is a precious asset if you never want to miss your prey. The T-Rex was also robust and enduring. Walking for a whole day at an average speed of 8 kilometers didn't frighten it. His body took him where his sense of smell led him. He could also be fast if the occasion presented itself, such as a hunting opportunity. Tyrannosaurus could reach speeds of 25 kilometers per hour, or 40 miles per hour, with strides of around 3.75 meters, or 12 feet. The dinosaur is an emblematic animal of the Cretaceous period. Its predatory characteristics are unquestionable. In fact, that's what it's famous for. 6 meters or 20 feet high, up to 18 meters or 60 feet long, and weighing almost 11 tons, it's a real monster. A Cretaceous titan. In appearance, it could be described as a giant crested lizard. The first striking thing about this dinosaur is its size, far greater than that of the Tyrannosaurus, which has become a benchmark in its class. But there's more. A long jaw and an army of fine razor-sharp teeth leave no doubt as to its diet. In its belly, scientists have noted the presence of fish scales, as well as those of other animals, notably land animals. The appeal of this singular dinosaur lies in the way it moves, the environment in which it lives, and the ambiguity of its diet and hunting habits. While Spinosaurus is unquestionably terrestrial, it is also an underwater animal. This is one of the features that fascinates dinosaur enthusiasts. The lower part of its jaw already gave some clues to its mixed lifestyle. This terrestrial animal feeds on fish, but it was its bones, and in particular its femur, that shed further light on the mystery. Proportionally, Spinosaurus's femur is much shorter than that of its terrestrial tetrapod contemporaries. Another important anatomical feature is the shape of its feet. The bones of its feet were flat, and the claws of its toes were rather large. This tells us that while it could move about on land, the action required a great deal of energy. For an alpha predator like this to be able to sustain itself and hunt prey, it couldn't afford to encounter such difficulties in its movements. This proves that he didn't live on the mainland all the time, but that he sometimes went into the water, at least to feed. The very nature of its bones validates this hypothesis. The bones of terrestrial predators, such as the T-Rex we mentioned earlier, are longer, lighter, and composed of cavities. These characteristics made walking on land easier. Spinosaurus, on the other hand, has solid bones more akin to certain marine animals. It is this high bone density in the limbs that would have enabled this dinosaur to remain submerged in water, rather than floating. Once again, this suggests an animal capable of moving through water. With nostrils ideally located at the top of the head to prevent water from seeping in, we could be dealing with a swimmer. However, despite its undisputed swimming ability, it seems that the remains of land animals found in its belly are also evidence of this dinosaur's opportunistic side. Some modern-day animals are too, like the grizzly bear. It is an outstanding fisherman, and fish remains its favorite food. But if the opportunity arises or the fishing isn't good, it's easily tempted by other types of prey. There's every reason to believe that Spinosaurus falls into the category of opportunistic animal. Equally at home in the water or on land, it was one of the greatest land carnivores of all time. He sits proudly on the podium of the world's most accomplished and terrifying alpha predators. Previously, we met a Pliosaur. This time, our journey gives us the opportunity to study a Plesiosaur. You'll be able to see for yourself the major differences between these two families. The Plesiosaur has been the subject of many legends, such as Loch Ness, and has also inspired great names in literature, such as Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth. But as fascinating as these legends are, it's not for its fame that we're going to study it here, but for its abilities as an apex predator. The Plesiosaurus, Hydrotherosaurus, Alexandrae, measures around 8 meters or 26 feet. It fishes with its 6-meter or 20-foot long neck. Its neck measures almost 2/3 of its body. It has no fewer than 60 vertebrae. Its head, on the other hand, is tiny in proportion to its neck, measuring a mere 30 centimeters. But that didn't stop it from hungrily devouring ammonites, belemnites, fish, and even marine reptiles. For the record, the fossils of this sea behemoth were discovered by Annie Montague Alexander. The dinosaur was named in her honor. The marine reptile we're about to see is frightening, as much for its colossal dimensions as for its uncommon predatory abilities. Tylosaurus was the largest of them all. This Mosasaurus must have reached almost 18 meters or 60 feet in length, and weighed up to 15 tons. 15 tons of fearsome danger. Its large head is reminiscent of a crocodile, but a crocodile of inordinate size. The body, meanwhile, is a clever blend of snake and fish. Despite these extraordinary dimensions, the mastodon moves with great ease. It is equipped with powerful fins that allow it to steer as it pleases, but also to move fast enough never to miss its target. Even if the mere idea of him opening his mouth makes your blood run cold, you absolutely must take a closer look at his teeth. They're numerous and razor sharp. As you can see, it also has a second set of teeth in its upper palate. Once the prey has been swallowed, it has no chance of escaping. It could take on any aquatic species that crossed its path. Nothing resisted him. He could eviscerate any prey in seconds. Fish, squid, plesiosaurs such as the Elasmosaurus, pterosaurs, sea turtles, and even other mosasaurs were all within his grasp, if his territorial mind was anything to go by. It also used its long snout to strike and stun its prey. Its skull alone could reach 1 meter, 20, or 4 feet. Look how easily this Mosasaurus, Tylosaurus, captures a pteranodon. It seems to appear out of nowhere. He manages to propel himself out of the water and makes short work of the bird. He reigns supreme in the oceans, decimating even the biggest sharks of his day. He spread terror wherever he went. For all the violence he was capable of, given the sheer size of the animals living at the time, without an alpha predator of this stature, the regulation and biodiversity of marine species would have been compromised. It played an essential role in the oceans throughout its reign, until it disappeared, as did many of its contemporaries after the Cretaceous crisis. An ice age is defined as an episode of glaciation that took place during a past geological period. Falling average temperatures cause ice caps to expand across the planet. This phenomenon can last for millions of years. Throughout its history, the Earth has experienced at least 5 major ice ages. It is now scientifically proven that the Earth goes through cycles of climate change, The causes of these changes are diverse. Modification of the Earth's orbit, changes in solar output, geological factors. As a result, temperatures drop significantly over long periods. This is known as an ice age. During an ice age, seabed temperatures drop considerably, allowing large glaciers, comparable in size to continents, to develop over a large part of the planet's surface. The first theories on past ice ages were established in the 18th century. In 1742, Pierre Martel, an engineer and geographer, studied the scattering of gigantic boulders in random formations in the Alpine Valley. Similar patterns of boulders in other parts of the world were subsequently discovered. By the middle of the 18th century, scientists were considering the possibility of ice as a means of moving these rocky materials. It was geologist Jens Esmark who first supported the existence of a worldwide sequence of ice ages. He later proposed a theory that changes in the Earth's climate were responsible for these ice ages. In the 20th century, scientist Milutin Milankovitch advanced the concept of cycles, named after him, the Milankovitch cycles, which relate long-term climate changes to periodic changes in the Earth's orbit around the Sun. This has opened up a new approach to making predictions about future major changes the Earth may undergo. How did scientists discover that the Earth had undergone ice ages? Evidence of ice ages comes in three different forms: geological, chemical, and paleontological. Each of these provides scientists with material to develop a general understanding of the effect of ice ages over the past billions of years. Geological evidence corresponds to the stripping of rocks, the deposition of unconsolidated material, sculpted valleys. Geological evidence has its limits. They can be deformed or erased over time, and it can be difficult to date them accurately. Chemical evidence is defined by variations in the isotope ratios of fossils found in sediment and rock samples. The isotope ratio is the ratio of the number of atoms of two isotopes in the same sample. To study the most recent glacial and interglacial periods, scientists use samples of ice cores and ocean sediments. They may also contain air bubbles, enabling analysis of the composition of the atmosphere during the period under study. Finally, paleontological evidence is characterized by changes in the geographical distribution of fossils. Most organisms that live in warm conditions do not survive ice ages, whereas those adapted to colder temperatures are more likely to survive. Thus, a low fossil count in higher latitudes indicates the spread of ice caps. Scientists rely on these three types of evidence and on numerous data sources to obtain the most consistent results possible. One of the most valuable sites used as an indicator of ancient climates is the Antarctic ice cap, which has provided information on past atmospheric temperature and composition. Little Dome Sea is a drilling site set at an altitude of over 3,200 meters, or 10,500 feet, above sea level on an East Antarctic plateau. Temperatures regularly drop to minus 50 degrees Celsius or minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The landscape is carpeted in white, and the first coastline lies more than 1,000 kilometers or 620 miles away. Since 2021, scientists have been drilling into the ice cap to extract ice cores 4 meters or 13 feet long. The aim is to reach ice layers at a depth of 2,700 meters or 8,900 feet. The idea is to be able to go back in time 1.5 million years and reveal new information about the climate of the time. 90% of the world's ice is concentrated in Antarctica. Antarctica covers an area of 14 million square kilometers. This gigantic white continent is an invaluable archive of the Earth's history. Its ice, thousands of meters thick, contains information on its temperature and the composition of its atmosphere. Scientists are as interested in the ice itself as in the air bubbles trapped inside it. The latter reveal the concentration of various greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Drilling has enabled us to go back a long way in time. What is the origin of these climate changes? Various causes are responsible for the appearance of ice ages. Some of them are interdependent. The Earth's orbit around the Sun undergoes cyclical variations over time, known as Milankovitch cycles. During these periods, the Earth's distance from the Sun and its inclination will change, resulting in a redistribution of the sunlight received. The movement of tectonic plates influences the glaciations that the Earth undergoes. Depending on the position of the continents, the flow of warm water towards the poles can be disrupted or blocked, leading to the formation of ice caps. Variations in the amount of continental and oceanic crust affect winds and ocean currents. Atmospheric compositions such as carbon dioxide and methane concentrations is linked to ice cap movements. Greenhouse gas levels decrease with their advance and increase with their retreat. Let's take a look at the 5 major ice ages in Earth's history. $2.4 billion years ago, the Earth experienced its first ice age, which was also one of the longest in its history. This was the Huronian glaciation. This glaciation began 2.4 billion years ago and lasted until minus 2.1 billion years during the Paleoproterozoic era. The oceans occupy almost 25% more than their present volume due to the degassing of the Earth's mantle. Lava from volcanic sites is rich in potassium and phosphorus, making it a high-quality fertilizer. Due to wind and weather, lava naturally breaks up and crumbles. Small pieces of material embed themselves in the fractures of the magmatic rocks and accumulate there in large numbers. As the rocks are porous, they retain not only moisture, but also a warm temperature ideal for the development of life. In the end, these seemingly inhospitable places were the scene of the development of the first organisms. Among these microbes carried by wind, weather, or tides are cyanobacteria, a type of prokaryotic bacteria with no nucleus. These unicellular organisms can live both in water and on land, in large colonies. Their metabolism is based on photosynthesis. They produce oxygen. Cyanobacteria in the air transform nitrogen into ammonium and nitrate, while those in the oceans trap carbon and produce the limestone of stromatolites. The combination of lava fragments and cyanobacterial growth gradually forms soil. Then, little by little in these same privileged environments, more complex organisms such as mosses and fungi appear. The latter will develop a method of rooting, in particular, mycenes. It was thanks in part to them that life first walked the earth, since by breaking rocks they enabled the first terrestrial settlements. It was only later that pollen also contributed to the proliferation of life. The Earth is not yet very conducive to the development of more complex forms of life. It is covered with active volcanoes, and toxic clouds are permanently present. Vast expanses of lava cover the ground as the sun floods in its deadly ultraviolet rays. Although cyanobacteria remain in the water, the flora is still widely dispersed. Nevertheless, a major event occurred 2.4 billion years ago that changed the face of life. It was the Great Oxidation. At that time, oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere was scarce. It remained trapped in minerals or enclosed in water. The Great Oxidation affects the Earth's waters, biosphere, and atmosphere. It can be seen as a catastrophe or an opportunity for life on Earth. Most organisms are anaerobic, but cyanobacteria are beginning to develop oxygenated photosynthesis. They occupy a new ecological niche and reproduce very rapidly by harnessing the sun's energy. Photosynthesis produces a waste product, oxygen, which cyanobacteria expel into the air. Initially, this oxygen is absorbed by the oxidation of surface iron, but as the number of cyanobacteria increases, the oxygen sinks, becomes saturated. This accumulation of oxygen in the atmosphere has had devastating consequences for anaerobic organisms, which cannot survive in the presence of oxygen. Oxygen is a highly reactive element that can disrupt the metabolic processes of anaerobic organisms by forming free radicals. These unstable molecules can damage proteins, nucleic acids, and cell membranes, leading to cell death. As a result, many of these organisms have been eliminated, leading to a mass extinction of anaerobic organisms. But increased oxygen levels have paved the way for the evolution of new life forms better adapted to these conditions. Oxygen enables much more efficient cellular respiration than other forms of energy metabolism. In other words, organisms capable of aerobic respiration can produce far more energy from a given quantity of nutrients than their anaerobic counterparts. Some organisms have evolved to use oxygen as the final electron acceptor in their electron transport chains, thereby greatly increasing the efficiency of ATP production, which could be described as the cell's energy currency. In addition, antioxidant enzymes such as superoxide, dismutase, or catalyses have evolved to neutralize toxic free radicals produced by reactions with oxygen, enabling these organisms to survive and thrive in an oxygen-rich environment. In order to survive, aerobic organisms have learned to use oxygen to breathe, eliminating the free radicals that can oxidize molecules and damage their bodies. This evolution was made possible by 3 new amino acids integrated into their genome: methionine, tryptophan, and selenocysteine. Since then, all aerobic organisms have learned to survive in the presence of oxygen, provided it remains at normal concentrations. If it exceeds these concentrations, oxygen remains unconditionally poisonous. Although this change of atmosphere was fatal to most life forms of the time, new organisms were emerging in the form of eukaryotes and metazoans. Eukaryotes include all organisms, whether unicellular or multicellular, as long as they contain a nucleus and organelles specialized for respiration. Today, eukaryotes encompass three major kingdoms of the living world: plants, fungi, and animals. The second group of organisms to develop is the metazoans. They are multicellular, consisting of a nucleus and organelles, and feed on organic matter. Their cells form tissues. The atmosphere is totally destabilized. Microorganisms have consumed most of the nutrients they needed to form oxygen. But there was another consequence for the climate. During this great oxygenation event, atmospheric oxygen increased considerably, thereby reducing methane. Oxygen combines with methane to form carbon dioxide and water. The latter do not retain heat as well as methane. At the same time, a mass extinction occurred for the majority of life forms, which were then anaerobic. For them, oxygen was toxic. At the same time, volcanic activity slowed for 250 million years. These events combined to produce less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, resulting in a greatly reduced greenhouse effect. Temperatures fell, and the planet entered an ice age. For the first time, the Earth's surface would have been entirely covered in ice. This abrupt change in climate is linked to the transformation of the atmosphere that occurred with the evolution of life. Photosynthesis processes carried out by prokaryotic bacteria released oxygen. At the same time, the limestone that forms traps CO2, considerably reducing its quantity in the atmosphere. The reduction in greenhouse gas emissions led to a drop in the Earth's temperature. At that time, the sun provided only 85% of the energy it does today. Temperatures reached as low as -50 degrees Celsius or -58 degrees Fahrenheit for tens of thousands of years. The water present at the time becomes ice. Albedo increases, accentuating cooling and freeze-up. For millions of years, the Earth resembled an enormous ball of ice, with a surface temperature of -10 degrees Celsius or 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists believe that this Huronian ice age brought photosynthesis to a virtual standstill. The Huronian glaciation occurred at a very early time in the Earth's history, long before the existence of dinosaurs or most of the life forms we know today. Its probable consequences have been erased by the billions of years of geological evolution that followed. The evidence of this period has been overturned by subsequent geological changes. Nevertheless, scientists have been able to trace the formation of vast glacial deposits. These accumulated in the form of sedimentary rocks, principally tillites, formed by the compaction of continental sediments containing material carried by glaciers, and lamanites. Glacial activity modifies the landscape, forming lakes and valleys. Such a drop in temperature must also have altered ocean circulation and atmospheric composition. Glaciation also had a geochemical influence, modifying the cycle of elements such as iron and oxygen in the oceans. Finally, this change in climate imposed difficult survival conditions on the life forms that remained at the time, and this certainly had an impact on their evolution, as well as on future life forms. And yet, life survives the cold. In principle, below the freezing point of water, the metabolic functions of organisms are interrupted. As water crystallizes, it invades the cytoplasm in organisms. Cell tissues are destroyed, and the organism dies. Yet microbial life can persist in such a seemingly hostile environment, and the return to life following the ice ages is proof of this. When imprisoned in ice, some microbes continue to metabolize at a much lower rate than normal, depending on the temperature and quantity of food available. Others suspend all energy consumption or form spores to survive in the absence of energy. As conditions improve, mechanisms are put in place to repair cellular damage. Microbial life faced with starvation will react in different ways. Some organisms will suffer, while others will react in different ways. They may develop ultra-microcells, synthesize stress proteins, or express starvation genes to become more resistant. Another solution is to reduce metabolism and become dormant, or to form spores. Cold shock and falling temperatures also place different demands on microbes. They will develop methods to counter the loss of membrane fluidity, the reduced rate of enzymatic processes, and cell damage. Ice subjected to extremely low temperatures, such as during glaciations, displays unusual properties. Liquid veins can be found. These are insoluble impurities in the crystalline structure that concentrate in the liquid phase and form a vein-like network, measuring just a few micrometers. These famous veins contain liquid water, nutrients, and biomolecules, a veritable oasis for the metabolism of the microorganisms trapped there. However, microbes must be able to tolerate a pH as low as 0 if they are to benefit from the energy present in acidic ice veins. The acidophiles most frequently found in liquid veins are eukaryotic cells, bacteria, and archaea. There is also a surface of mineral grains dragged along by the ice, which develops a thin film of water that remains in a liquid state. This allows microorganisms to extract nutrients and the energy they need. They will have to adapt to keep their cytoplasm fluid, even when confronted with a temperature of -50 degrees Celsius or 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite the catastrophic situation that befell the Earth during the Ice Age, its heart continues to be active. The CO2 emitted by volcanoes accumulates under the ice and is suddenly released into the atmosphere, reinforcing the greenhouse effect and raising surface temperatures. Deglaciation then takes place in just a few tens of thousands of years. Volcanoes have also helped preserve life. They have kept certain areas out of the ice. Thanks to them, many species have been able to survive episodes of glaciation. As soon as the climate becomes milder again, species gradually colonize the regions surrounding these geothermal refuges. Studies carried out in the vicinity of these geothermal zones have shown a richness of biodiversity that diminishes with distance. Hundreds of millions of years have passed since the Huronian glaciation. The Earth has since been rebuilt. 800 million years ago, it consisted of a single vast continent, Rodinia, surrounded by a gigantic ocean, Merovia. At that time, the average temperature was 10.5 degrees Celsius, or 51 degrees Fahrenheit, and the young sun emitted 6% less light than it does today. The day lasted less than 22 hours, and the year comprised 13 months. Present-day North America forms the heart of Rodinia. Australia lies at our latitudes and Antarctica almost at the equator. As a result of magmatic movements and volcanic activity, Rodinia began to fragment around 750 million years ago. Initially, it split into two blocks, in the middle of which a new ocean, Panthalassa, the ancestor of the Pacific Ocean, was born. The part that today represents North America heads towards the ice-covered South Pole. The land in the northern half of Rodinia heads towards the North Pole. Between the two halves lies the Congo Craton. This is a hard, stable zone that was once consolidated to the lithosphere. A few million years later, these three parts will come together again to form a new supercontinent called Panatee. The collisions associated with this future meeting will give rise to mountains, the Pan-African orogeny. At this time, the mid-oceanic ripples are not very active, and average temperatures are falling. During the Varanger glaciation, the Earth actually underwent two glacial episodes. The first, known as the Sturtian glaciation, began 720 million years ago and ended 660 million years ago. Over the next 10 million years, temperatures rose again, forming an interglacial period. The second glacial episode, known as the Merino glaciation, occurred between 650 and 630 million years ago. These periods of severe glaciation are recognized as the most severe in Earth's history. Since the last ice age, the Earth has seen a resurgence in the diversity of life. There are new types of algae, such as chromophytes, an evolutionary grade grouping organisms with chlorophyll, but also haptophytes, a division of unicellular algae characterized by the presence of a particular extremity called a haptonym, or dinoflagellates, a class of highly diversified unicellular aquatic eukaryotic organisms. There are also hyphae, the filaments that make up mycelium and fungal spores. However, no traces of animals such as hydras or sponges have been found during this period. The parts of ancient Rodinia that reach the poles are not warm. Vast expanses of ice take shape. Soils and oceans freeze over hundreds of meters. Polar caps reach the equator. A feedback loop begins as ice reflects more of the sun's rays than darker oceans. The entire planet freezes over. Temperatures plunge to -50 degrees Celsius, and the thickness of ocean ice reaches over a kilometer. The Earth literally becomes a snowball. The distribution of carbon undergoes profound changes, leading to a reduction in oceanic organic productivity. Photosynthesis is halted for millions of years. Runoff water is no longer an agent of erosion. The atmosphere on Earth is distressing. The sun, although present, shines less brightly. The air is dry, cold, and unbreathable. Snowfall is rare, but powerful winds bring a little dynamism to this desolate land. No liquid water circulates. The situation seems catastrophic for life, and yet, at the bottom of the ocean, life persists in the form of algae and bacteria. And not only does it persist, but multicellular organisms also took off just after this ice age. How was this possible when everything seems so unfavorable to the concentration of nutrients and oxygen needed to sustain life? Scientists have carried out computer simulations to reproduce the snowball effect with an equivalent rate of glaciation. It appears that near the equator there are still refuge zones where the ocean would not have frozen. This is how extremophilic organisms were able to isolate themselves in a closed environment. In the end, evolution continued and even accelerated. Microbial life could even survive and develop in solid ice. Glaciers would have played a local role in oxygenating the oceans. Certain metals, such as iron and manganese, were overrepresented in oxidized forms, testifying to a significant local supply of oxygen. The farther away from the grounding line, the rarer the oxidized forms. The grounding line is the zone between the part where the ice floats and the part where it rests on land. During this ice age, the grounding line may well have been a veritable Eden filled with oxygen. This oxygen came from small air bubbles enclosed in the compacted snow that formed the glaciers. At the grounding lines, these bubbles were released into the liquid ocean as the ice melted and rubbed against the rough bedrock. Even as the ice descends to the equator, volcanism continues, and CO2 and methane are constantly being emitted into the atmosphere. Once the concentration of carbon dioxide reaches 350 times today's level, the greenhouse effect becomes sufficient to reverse the glacial situation and melt the ice. Life can resume. Work carried out by Noah Plonavsky in the United States reveals that the erosion of continents during the melting of the ice released large quantities of phosphorus. Its high presence in the ocean would have contributed to the proliferation of phytoplankton and consequently the release of oxygen into the atmosphere. 1 million years, that's how long it would. Various organisms in the Ediacara fauna resemble jellyfish, arthropods, or leaf-like forms. Some resemble nothing known today. Most of the fossils found at this time do not fit easily into today's phyla. Cells, which until then had reproduced by dividing, were now able to stick together, thanks to a protein called collagen, to form the first multicellular animals. The latter are reduced to their simplest expression, i.e., a simple cluster of cells brought together for the benefits they all derive from it. There are no nervous, vascular, or digestive systems as yet. The sponge is the oldest animal known to have come into existence. Today, this living fossil numbers some 10,000 species. The sponge's body is soft and pierced by numerous tiny holes called pores. It is through these pores that the water passes and is filtered to extract the nutrients the sponge needs. The body is supported by a skeleton composed of limestone or silicon. Sponges have an extraordinary capacity for regeneration. Once a part has been removed, it grows back without being damaged. Sponges have a very wide distribution, having colonized both fresh and brackish marine waters to depths of over 5,000 meters or 16,400 feet, as well as shallow waters, regardless of climate. After a period of calm, the climate became capricious again, and a new glaciation occurred during the Upper Ordovician and Silurian periods, around 460 to 420 million years ago. During the Ordovician period, which began 485 million years ago, the continents were grouped together to form the supercontinent Gondwana. This was formed by the fracturing of Rodinia. The history of our planet is punctuated by the merging and separation of its land masses under the effect of plate tectonics, and the continents never stop moving. While Gondwana settles at the South Pole, 3 other smaller continents, Laurentia, Siberia, and Baltica, and their islands head north to find a warm home near the equator. Here they experience the vagaries of a tropical climate, a hot sun and violent rainfall. The rain that falls from the sky carries with it carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Combined with the heat, the rocks are dissolved. Carbon-containing ions are released and carried by runoff into the oceans. Marine animals use them to build their shells and skeletons. When they die, the carbonate material is stored in sediments on the seabed. In the long term, the process of taking carbon from the atmosphere and burying it on the ocean floor considerably reduces the amount of atmospheric CO2. The CO2 released by erupting volcanoes is not enough to compensate for these losses. The greenhouse effect diminishes, and temperatures on Earth begin to fall too. This ice age is not, however, an icy one. We're not talking about a snowball Earth here. It's even likely that in its early stages, it contributed to the development of biodiversity. During this period, the number of marine animal genera increased, known as the Great Ordovician Biodiversification Event, or GOBE. The rapid diversification of plankton favors the development of fauna living on the ocean floor. Cambrian trilobites, inarticulate brachiopods, and eucrinoids gave way to cephalopods, crinoids, and articulate brachiopods. Continental seas are shallow and rich in life, and the first coral reefs appear. Mollusks become common, especially bivalves, gastropods, and nautiloids. Corals appear, colonizing the oceans and building immense reefs like veritable ecosystems. They helped enrich the marine fauna. By the end of the Ordovician period, the oceans were teeming with species, each more diverse and varied than the last. From starfish and sponges to sea scorpions and other extraordinary species of clumsily swimming primitive fish. It was also at this time that the first large predators appeared. Until then, animals had been almost exclusively benthic, staying close to the seabed, but orthocerid cephalopods were the first to swim in open water. Trilobites had better watch out, because the terror of the seas is approaching. Here we see a Cambrian. Sporting a straight cone several meters long, it has tentacles that it can wave from all sides. Its bulging eyes enable it to spot its prey in search of its next meal. With a single stroke of the beak, the carapace of a trilobite breaks in two. From now on, the entire food web becomes more complex. Biodiversity may appreciate the drop in temperature compared with the Cambrian, but it will have trouble coping with the next challenge. The Andes-Saharan glaciation contributed to one of the 5 greatest mass extinctions in Earth's history, known as the Ordovician Silurian extinction. Following this extinction, 70% of species disappeared from the Earth's surface. But what was the origin of this glaciation? Far away, several thousand light-years from Earth, a star exploded in a supernova. The gigantic burst of energy releases gamma rays that reach the Earth at the speed of light. These rays penetrate the atmosphere, altering the ozone layer and darkening the planet. Nitrogen and oxygen are transformed into the toxic gas nitrogen dioxide. The latter engulfs the planet to the point of blocking the passage of sunlight. This theory has little support in the scientific community, as the main obstacle to its acceptance is the difficulty of proving it, as traces of the supernova have long since disappeared. But another cause could have had an impact on the climate of the time. Although solar luminosity was around 4.5% less intense than today during the late Ordovician period, a decrease which under today's climatic conditions would lead to glaciation, the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide was considerably higher, reaching levels up to 18 times higher than today. This high CO2 concentration would normally have exerted a powerful greenhouse effect, counterbalancing the lower solar luminosity. Parallel to these factors, the Appalachian orogeny was underway, a geological process that spanned approximately 325 to 260 million years. This phenomenon was the result of the subduction of the oceanic tectonic plate beneath the North American continental plate. This geological process contributed to a massive reduction in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. The explanation lies in the silicate weathering mechanism, a chemical reaction accelerated by the newly formed mountains, which captures carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and stores it in the Earth's crust. In addition, tectonic plate movements have led to significant changes in the distribution of continents, which may have influenced ocean and atmospheric currents, thus modifying the climate. To this we can add the Earth's orbital variations, which also have the potential to influence climate by altering the incidence of solar radiation on the Earth's surface. Whatever the cause, glaciation is underway. As ice accumulates on the continent, sea levels drop. Shallow marine areas are reduced. The first links in the food chain are affected, resulting in famine for all organisms. What was once an ocean teeming with life is totally devastated. In just over 500 years, a third of the existing fauna had disappeared. Another 100,000 years later, the famine continues. Glaciers sucked water from the ocean. Shoals are drained, drying up. The sea retreats several hundred meters, but once again life will prevail. Beyond a certain depth, organisms can find refuge. Nautiloids and eurypterids seek shelter on the seabed. Other animals adapt to cold water. Such is the case of the Astrapus. This small primitive fish of the ostracoderm family, barely larger than a hand, has no fins and moves with the back of its body. To feed, it sucks up small invertebrates living on the seabed or the debris of dead animals. Its skin is highly sensitive to vibrations, enabling it to escape the predators of the time. Astrapus was the first to feature a primitive backbone. This creature, relatively insignificant at first glance, is in fact the first known vertebrate fish. This lineage would later give rise to birds, reptiles, and mammals. Astrapus proved particularly resistant to this new ice age. It follows the retreating ocean. It is a picky eater, feeding on whatever it can find. It also tolerates cold water better than other aquatic creatures. The Astrapus adapts to this new ordeal, and soon a new variety of fish is born. These were equipped with the first gills, enabling them to absorb food more easily. It would be another 500,000 years before the planet began to warm up. At last, the glaciers melted. But for the species that had managed to survive the Ice Age, it was a new climatic upheaval. The toll was heavy. Over 70% of species disappeared forever. Thanks to nature's formidable resilience, life will resume and write a new chapter in the history of the Earth. The oceans will be repopulated by astonishing species, and the planet will gradually return to its tropical climate until the next ice age, which began in the Carboniferous period around 320 million years ago. We're in the Devonian over 400 million years ago. This was a pivotal period for vertebrates, but also for vegetation. The Earth is still mostly covered by the immense Panthalassa Ocean. Proto-Gondwana slowly slides northwards. It is set to collide with the young continent of Laurasia, formed a few million years earlier. These two continental blocks would unite at the start of the next period, the Carboniferous, to form a single continent, Pangea. At this time, the ice caps were absent, and the Earth enjoyed a relatively mild climate, around 25 degrees Celsius, or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. The weather was warm and vegetation thrived and conquered terra firma. The first terrestrial plants, characterized by lichens and mosses, appeared around 500 million years ago. Over millions of years, creeping plants evolved into ferns and lycopods, until during the Carboniferous period, over 350 million years ago, for the first time in Earth's history, they became rich in abundant vegetation. Thanks to warm, humid temperatures, the first insects proliferated. For the time being, they are the only terrestrial inhabitants. There are currently no herbivores. As a result, plants are literally colonizing the Earth. The first forests formed, vegetation diversified and became abundant. Large tree ferns grow alongside lycopods a few meters high. The first broad-leaved plants appear. Thanks to photosynthesis and the resulting oxygen, the Earth's atmosphere is enriched with oxygen, which will not be without consequences. Indeed, the rise in oxygen levels combined with high atmospheric pressure favored the most energy-intensive metabolisms, and large terrestrial vertebrates grew to titanic proportions. One of the best-known examples is the dragonfly, Meganeura, with a wingspan of up to 75 centimeters or 30 inches. There's also the Arthropleura, a distant ancestor of millipedes, which measured up to 1.8 meters or 6 feet in length. Rising oxygen levels also led vegetation to become more resistant to fire. It was also at this time that flowering plants appeared. Increased plant development leads to the absorption of large quantities of atmospheric CO2, which considerably reduces the greenhouse effect. Lignin and cellulose from tree trunks and plant debris accumulate. A polar climate process is triggered. Summers are now too cold for winter snow to melt. The snow accumulates and creates sufficient pressure to form ice. Albedo rises as the ice sheet, an ice sheet covering the mainland, expands. A feedback loop is triggered, and the ice extends further and further. Under the effect of this climate change, plants are forced to slow down their evolution. The high oxygen level triggers fires despite the prevailing humidity. The combination of slower vegetation growth and the occurrence of fires causes a further increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, preventing a snowball effect through greenhouse warming. Over the years, the drop in albedo leads to warmer summers and milder winters, limiting snow depth in areas where glaciers grow. The melting of ice caused by global warming leads to a rise in sea level, which now covers the anoxic zones that used to trap carbon. The Earth now has less surface area to sequester carbon, and a greater proportion of carbon dioxide returns to the atmosphere. The Karoo glaciation came to an end 260 million years ago, bringing the Earth's atmospheric oxygen levels close to those of today. Since then, there has been no ice age until the one we're currently in, the Pliocene Quaternary, which began around 2.58 million years ago, at the end of the Pliocene. Today, we are in the last Great Ice Age. It began during the Upper Pliocene some 2.58 million years ago. We are currently experiencing an interglacial period, which is reflected in the retreat of glaciers, accompanied by global warming. The current ice age is known as the Pliocene Quaternary Glaciation. Since its beginnings, the Earth has undergone several glacial and interglacial periods. Ice caps advance and retreat on timescales ranging from 40,000 to 100,000 years. In the past, they covered the entire globe. Today, they are limited to Greenland, Antarctica, and a few smaller glaciers, such as the one covering Baffin Island. $2.58 million years ago, the continents were roughly as they are today. Scientists estimate that they have not moved more than 100 kilometers, or 62 miles, in relation to each other since the beginning of this period. During the previous period, the main change was the connection between North and South America. As a result, the Isthmus of Panama is formed, causing the disappearance of warm equatorial currents and the onset of an Atlantic cooling cycle. The climate gradually became drier and colder. The Greenland ice sheet appears, while the Antarctic ice sheet thickens. The collision between the African plate and Europe continues. The Alps continue to orogenize. Combined with tectonic movement, erosion phenomena, and the trapping of atmospheric CO2 in the form of carbonates continue, reducing the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. These phenomena are leading to global climate change. Tropical forests are shrinking, with only a small portion remaining around the equator. Savannas and grasses are now conquering every continent. Temperate forests of deciduous trees are found at mid-latitudes, and conifers and tundra at high latitudes. Antarctica is a veritable frozen desert. The marine and terrestrial faunas, although primitive, are now modern. The junction of North and South America and the formation of the Isthmus of Panama have brought about a great deal of inter-American exchange. A wide variety of animals can now migrate from south to north and from north to south. Mammals, reptiles, amphibians, arthropods, and even flightless birds. Mammals, represented by rodents, mastodons, and opossums, are widespread in North America. We also find Gomphotherium, a now extinct species closely resembling today's elephants. It has 4 almost upright tusks and a short, tapir-like proboscis that falls back on the lower jaw. Sloths, glyptodons, and armadillos migrate northwards across the Isthmus of Panama. Carnivores diversify. They include dogs, bears, and canids. In Eurasia, while the presence of primates diminishes, rodents are widespread. Giant rodent species roam the planet's surface. A giant rodent fossil, Joseph-Fortigacea monesi, was discovered on a beach in Uruguay in 1987. It appears to be the largest and heaviest rodent known today. Its closest relative today is the pacarana, a rodent that weighs between 10 and 15 kilograms, or 20 and 35 pounds, and lives in the tropical rainforests of the Andes. Joseph-Fortigacea monesi, on the other hand, measures up to 3 meters or 10 feet in length and weighs up to a ton. His skull alone measures 57 centimeters or 23 inches. In comparison, It's as tall as a bison. Its morphology is similar to that of a guinea pig, but proportionally the size of a hippopotamus. Its jaw is exceptionally strong. In Africa, primates continue to evolve, and ungulates dominate. It was also at this time that the first humans and giraffes appeared. The number of bovid species increases. For the first time since the Cretaceous, and thanks to the great inter-American exchange, North American species mix with those of the South. Marsupials remain dominant in Australia. Wombats and kangaroos appear. Platypuses appear. As the climate changes, tropical flora is replaced by subtropical forests and grasslands. Western Europe was enriched with trees from the birch, oak, and ash families, as well as conifers further north. But the Earth is affected by a gradual cooling, and vertebrates are not indifferent. Evolution continues, but it's getting poorer. Perissodactyl ungulates decline. Conversely, the large artiodactyl ungulates fared much better, as they were satisfied with a coarse diet and better able to withstand periods of food shortage. Mastodons, these gigantic herbivorous mammals, proliferated, and the first elephants appeared. All these giants were an important source of food, and new larger carnivorous mammals appeared. Most of the fauna that reigned at the end of the Pliocene no longer exists today. The ice ages of the next few thousand years took their toll on many of these animals. Some were able to migrate to milder latitudes, while others were doomed to extinction. Even if winters were no harsher than today, the difference lay in the fact that summer no longer existed. The exact number of glaciations during this period is open to debate. 4 major glaciations have been clearly identified, separated by interglacial periods. These were the Gunns Glaciation from 760,000 to 530,000 years ago, the Mindell Glaciation from 650,000 to 350,000 years ago, the Risk Glaciation from 300,000 to 120,000 years ago, and the Worm Glaciation from 80,000 to 10,000 years ago. An important detail in the history of the Earth differentiates this ice age from the others. Man is now at the heart of the glaciations. In fact, it was thanks to these ice ages that the great human adventure began. Climate change means lower sea levels. Far from being a tragedy for mankind, this is actually a door opening for our ancestors from the African continent, Homo erectus, to travel north. In Europe, the cold sets in a little more each winter. Forests wither for lack of water. Oak forests give way to cold, arid steppes. The herds of animals that still roam the plains in search of moss and lichen are a godsend for the human tribes living in Europe. With their rudimentary tools, they catch the young animals and take the adult ones that have already died. As the years go by, the extreme cold sets in, with temperatures dropping to minus 30 degrees Celsius or minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Glaciers extend as far as Scotland and the northern Netherlands. The tribes of men, who may have ventured out before, return down in search of warmer lands and temperatures. At this time, fire still eluded them. Ice caps more than 3,000 meters or 10,000 feet thick cover Greenland, North America, and Siberia. All the water used to form these glaciers has caused sea levels to drop by 100 meters. New lands are revealed. The men who populate the African continent now have new prospects. Europe and its herds of reindeer were all the more attractive as the tropical forests had not withstood the heat, and savanna and desert now decorated the landscape. This glaciation lasted for around 80,000 years until an interglacial era began, with the climate warming for around 20,000 years. This cycle has been repeated 4 times to date. It has to be said that the most common state of our planet over the last few million years has been glaciation. In the midst of these glaciations, man has been able to adapt. He protected himself against the cold. Glaciations opened up passages in the sea, and man has continued to travel through glaciations and deglaciations. The event that forever changed its relationship with the climate was the domestication of fire 400,000 years ago. From then on, it penetrated cold regions. They could now set up camp, build shelters and cabins. They can live on permanently frozen ground, their means of heating eternally at hand. After an ice age lasting over 90,000 years, the last great deglaciation began 21,500 years ago and lasted around 10,000 years. At the end of this period, the Earth underwent profound changes. Its average temperature rose by around 4 degrees. The gigantic ice caps that once covered a large part of the North, as far north as Belgium and Europe, melted. Sea levels rose by more than 100 meters. Flora was radically transformed, and the global water cycle intensified. Over 20,000 years ago, the Earth's climate was stable. Atmospheric CO2 levels were relatively low. It was cold, and the oceans were much lower than they are today. 19,000 years ago, a tiny area in the north began to warm up, while the south remained cold and hardly changed at all. CO2 is still low, and the ice caps are not moving. This evolution of the north is undoubtedly due to orbital changes that brought the Earth closer to the sun in summer, while the south was plunged into shadow. The continents are concentrated in the north at high latitudes. This is where the ice caps were formed. Even the slightest warming, of the order of a fraction of a degree, is enough to cause a large volume of ice to melt. Fresh water then flows into the Atlantic. The Atlantic is like an ocean corridor, linking the 2 poles. It carries warm water from the intertropical Atlantic far northwards. Once in the polar zone, this water loses its heat to the atmosphere. It becomes denser and sinks to the depths before flowing southwards. This circulation brings heat from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere. However, if an influx of lighter fresh water occurs in the North Atlantic, the heat in the south may have accumulated as the north cooled. This phenomenon may explain why, 17,500 years ago, the situation shifted. Temperatures in the south rose and the north cooled. Atmospheric CO2 levels rise slowly. After 1,500 years, temperatures in the north also start to rise again, along with the amount of atmospheric CO2. This time, 16,000 years ago, warming affected all latitudes and zones. Atmospheric CO2 levels rose at a faster rate. According to scientific research, warming in the southern hemisphere caused massive degassing of the Southern Ocean, releasing massive amounts of carbon dioxide. By 10,000 years ago, warming had reached its definitive value. Atmospheric carbon dioxide levels stabilized. Over the next 4,000 years, the ice caps will retreat. This scenario could foreshadow the future of our planet if it is subjected to another episode of massive warming. In just 3 centuries, human activity has produced and released into the atmosphere 30% more carbon dioxide than during the last deglaciation, which lasted 10,000 years. For just over 10,000 years, the Earth has been in an interglacial period, characterized as a warm period known as the Holocene. Melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise to their present levels 6,000 years ago. It was at this time that the Black Sea began to fill up. The ice sheets gradually melted, and the land that had been hidden beneath them was freed from the ice and brought to the surface. Temperate fauna and flora reclaimed the middle and high latitudes. As for those that were adapted to the cold climate, they occupy other ecological niches. The rise in temperature during this interglacial period is not without consequences. In tropical zones, rainfall increases, leading to the shrinking of deserts. Rising sea levels isolate the British Isles from the European continent, moving habitable areas northwards. While flora and fauna have not changed significantly, the distribution of species has. Herds of large herbivores left the tropics as they became invaded by vast expanses of forest. They are now interested in the savannas that have appeared in the northern and southern deserts. In the northern hemisphere and Australia, megafauna are becoming less and less present. Large mammals are affected by a wave of extinction. The disappearance of mammoths and other large herbivores has had an impact on the climate. When these animals were present 12,000 years ago, they emitted 9.6 million tons of methane per year. As they disappeared, atmospheric methane levels fell, and so did the greenhouse effect, causing the planet to cool. The mammoth was a remarkable animal. Closely resembling today's elephants, it had a large head with a trunk, and a massive body with 4 pillared limbs. The largest species reached between 6 and 8 tons. Throughout their evolution, they adapted to ice ages and cold waves. The size of their ears and tails has diminished considerably. The hair, most exposed to thermal shock, could reach 1 meter in length. Their wool was 6 times thicker than a human hair. Their highly developed sinuses enabled them to process immense quantities of cold air. Their prominent tusks could reach up to 5 meters or 16 feet, an ideal tool for flushing out grass buried under the snow. Mammoths aren't the only ones affected by the extinction wave. In Australia, large species of reptiles and marsupials are disappearing. In North America, megafauna are not spared either. Mastodons, relatives of mammoths and elephants, are suddenly disappearing. The great land sloths, which grew to the size of cows, did not survive. In the family of large carnivores, the American cheetah, the saber-toothed tiger, and the American lion are no more. Giant armadillos, giant bears, and giant beavers have also disappeared. Man's favorite game, the herbivorous wood-eating mammals such as the antelope, are also disappearing from North America. This megafauna has a long lifespan, a low mortality rate, and a slow population increase. Few predators are capable of attacking their adult specimens. Nevertheless, megafauna are highly vulnerable to climate change. The arrival and spread of early man coincided with the beginning of the extinction wave. The mammoth is an animal that provides mankind with everything it needs: ivory for tools, bones for building huts, fur for covering up and protecting itself from the cold, meat as food, and even grease to keep the fire burning. Man has therefore not hesitated to overhunt this giant of history, contributing to its disappearance. But man and hunting were not the only factors behind the mammoth's disappearance. Mammoths were extremely well adapted to the cold. Global warming during the Holocene caused the evolution of grass and shrub-filled steppes into coniferous forests and tundra regions. Although herbivorous, the mammoth's dentition was probably not equipped to consume tree foliage. Some species, such as the woolly mammoth with its thick fur that kept it warm even in freezing climates, could have died out from hypothermia, while others, such as the bison, have adapted to climate change. The increase in temperature on Earth has not been sustainable for them. Ever since the discovery of the Ice Ages in the 18th century, mankind has been wondering whether an Ice Age might return. The Earth is currently in an interglacial period. The periodic and alternating nature of glacial and interglacial periods is now well established, as is the inevitable return of the Ice Ages. Since its very beginnings, the Earth's climate has been influenced by greenhouse gases and astronomical forcing. The latter is due to the slow changes in the inclination of the Earth's axis and the shape of its orbit. Glaciations in the Northern Hemisphere during the Quaternary era are punctuated by variations in obliquity. The first Ice Ages, between 3 and 1 million years ago, occurred in regular cycles every 41,000 years. Over the last million years, the periodicity has increased to 100,000 years. The ice caps go from deglaciation to glaciation when astronomical forcing crosses a critical threshold, and vice versa. 420,000 years ago, the interglacial period lasted almost 30,000 years instead of the usual 10,000, because astronomical variations were not strong enough to reverse the system. The Earth is still in this situation today, and it is possible that the interglacial period we are currently in will persist naturally for another 50,000 years if the carbon cycle remains undisturbed. The study of the carbon cycle on the scale of the last century has enabled us to better understand how it works. One of the theories put forward is the hypothesis of a return to the initial natural state thanks to the erosion of silicate rocks, which make up a large part of the Earth's crust. Erosion increases in hot, humid climates. Erosion consumes CO2, transforming it into basic carbon. As a result, ocean acidity decreases. This is a natural factor that has certainly kept liquid water on the Earth's surface for over 4 billion years. This theoretical approach does not take into account the influence of the organic carbon cycle. A significant proportion of this element is buried in organic form, making its dynamics much more complicated. A possible return of the Ice Ages is therefore not immediately foreseeable. In 50,000 years at the earliest. Do you think that by then mankind will have found ways to adapt to a new ice age? In general, we might assume that animals need neural networks to feel, perceive, and behave, as these networks perform complex neural computations that promote their survival. Nevertheless, amoebae and other single-celled organisms can move around and sense their environment, without the need for a complex nervous system, thanks to a process known as chemotaxis. So it should come as no surprise that unicellular organisms contain simple but effective sensory structures. Indeed, they possess the most primitive sensory mechanism, and arguably the simplest means of processing the information they receive from the environment around them. This is particularly evident in the case of vision, with a functional eye-like ocelloid in dinoflagellates, and in the case of cyanobacteria, which seem to have what it takes to qualify as one of the most elementary vision systems. The senses of touch and hearing are also derived from single-celled organisms. However, in the case of chemosensation, it has been proposed that smell is more correctly defined by the neural system used, implying that olfaction evolved after the transition to multicellularity. The visual pathway is undeniably one of the wonders of nature. The ability to see near and far, in black and white and in color, while embracing a wide field of vision, certainly represents an evolutionary advantage of remarkable, almost miraculous magnitude. To understand the history of vision, we need to go back in time to explore the theories of eye evolution. Step by step, we understand how this organ is developed over time. Scientists have been divided into two camps. On the one hand, there are those who believe that eyes had a polyphylogenetic origin, meaning that the eye would have evolved independently several times in different species. On the other, those who believed in a monophylogenetic theory, asserting that all eyes derive from a common ancestor, and that each eye type had evolved separately according to the specific needs of the organism. According to recent studies, the trend favors the second theory, i.e., the monophylogenetic origin of eyes. Genetic research has revealed that the PAX6 gene, responsible for light detection, is common to all sighted species. The presence of all three eye types in mollusks intrinsically suggests a monophylogenetic origin of this visual organ. Exactly how long it took for these developments from a single ancestor species to occur remains unknown. Biologists have identified 4 key stages in the evolution of the eye: emergence of efficient photopigments, acquisition of directionality, formation of the photoreceptor membrane fold, and development of optical focusing ability. "600 million years ago, the first organisms developed the most primitive visual organ, consisting of a single photoreceptor, composed of 2 distinct chemical substances, a light-sensitive receptor and a pigment. Its unique function was to detect the presence or absence of light, acting as a kind of electrical switch, with only 2 possible states, on or off. The use of this structure was relatively simple, as it was not used for the perception of movement or localization like our modern eyes. Instead, its role was dedicated to a process called photoperiodicity, which was equivalent to the modern circadian rhythm. In the presence of light, certain reactions occurred, while in its absence they were inhibited. Let's meet a specimen equipped with this very first visual system. This marine animal is very primitive. The hagfish resembles an eel and has no jaws. The hagfish's eyes are very simple and resemble the pineal organs found in non-mammalian vertebrates, especially that they are positioned on either side of its head. Curiously, despite these eyes, the hagfish appears almost blind and reacts very little to light, even when its eyes are removed. It would seem that hagfish eyes aren't really made for vision. In fact, they seem to play a role similar to that of a circadian organ, i.e., they could help it regulate its biological rhythms, like our internal clock. A remarkable example of the evolution of the vision system can be seen in the developmental changes observed in the eyes of lampreys. These changes support the hypothesis that the lamprey's ancestors succeeded those of the hagfish in the course of evolution. Indeed, the Anomalocaris, or lamprey larvae, have eye characteristics similar to those of the hagfish. In the larval stage, its eyes are small, sunken under the skin, and have a relatively undifferentiated retina, giving it very limited or non-existent vision. Over time, however, a slow process of neuronal differentiation takes place in a specific order. Ganglion cells, followed by amacrine and horizontal cells, then photoreceptors, and finally bipolar cells are formed. This sequence of differentiation is similar to that observed in jawed vertebrates for the development of their retina. When metamorphosis occurs over hundreds of thousands of years, the lamprey's eye undergoes significant transformations. It enlarges considerably, its retina differentiates completely, the lens develops, the cornea divides into scleral and dermal layers, allowing the eye to move relative to the epidermis. As in jawed fish, extraocular muscles develop, and finally, the eye bursts through the surface to form a visual organ similar to that of vertebrates. The process of eye development in lampreys suggests that these animals have inherited their visual apparatus from a common ancestor they share with hagfish. The existence of a hagfish-like larval eye, which transformed into a vertebrate-like eye in adulthood, supports the idea that lampreys evolved from a common ancestor with hagfish. The next step in the evolution of the eye was the fusion of these photoreceptors to form an eye spot. This advance enabled the organism to detect the intensity of light. In simple terms, if several photoreceptors were activated in an eye spot, this meant that there was strong luminosity and vice versa. This adaptation improved the perception of surrounding brightness. Once again, scientists have discovered clues in embryonic development. Early in the process, a neural structure develops and gives rise to the eye, forming two sacs, or vesicles, on either side. Later, each vesicle coils to form a C-shaped retina, which lines the inside of the eye. It's very likely that evolution followed a similar pattern. At a later stage in embryological development, as the retina folds inwards, the lens forms, leading to a thickening of the outer surface of the embryo, known as the ectoderm. The ectoderm swells into the curved space created by the C-shaped retina, gradually detaching from the rest of the ectoderm to become an independent floating element. It is likely that a similar sequence of changes took place in the course of evolution. The exact date of this change remains unknown, but in 1994, researchers at Lund University in Sweden demonstrated that the optical components of the eye could evolve relatively rapidly, within the space of 1 million years. If this is the case, it is conceivable that the image-forming eye emerged from the non-visual proto-eye in a short period of time on the geological scale. In parallel with the emergence of the eye spot, organisms also developed locomotion mechanisms such as flagella and cilia. These developments led to the need to localize the light source. To fulfill this role, several eye patches fused together to form an eye patch, like a patchwork quilt. These eye patches enabled the organism to roughly locate the light source and orient itself in its direction. By grouping several eye patches together in this way, organisms were able to improve their ability to perceive and move in relation to ambient light. In order to improve localization, the eye patch had to undergo progressive expansion. However, space was an evolutionary constraint. In response to this challenge, nature came up with a solution: the eye cup, also known as the optical cup. The development of the eye cup in vertebrates proceeds as follows. The eyes take shape from evaginations of the developing diencephalon. Depressions known as optic grooves form on either side of the rostral neural plate. As the neural plate folds upwards and inwards to form the neural tube, these growing regions project outwards and are called optic vesicles. When the expanding optic vesicle comes into contact with the surface ectoderm in a specific region called the lens placode, this induces changes in both tissues. The optic vesicle then invaginates to form the optic cup, while the ectoderm undergoes differentiation to form the lens hollow, which later transforms into the lens itself. It is sometimes suggested that the invagination of the optic cup results from the growth of the lens, but observations show that this cannot be the case. In fact, a normal ocular cup and retina can develop in the absence of a lens, indicating that these developmental processes are independent and follow distinct pathways. This adaptation enabled the organism to precisely determine the angle of the incident light beam according to the photoreceptor activated. Thus, the optic cup played an important role in improving the ability to localize the light source, despite the spatial constraints faced by the organism. By this stage, the primitive eye was fully formed, and all the species that possessed this organ entered into fierce competition for available resources. This competition gave rise to a major evolutionary event, known as the Cambrian explosion, which occurred around 540 million years ago. Scientists argue that the evolution of the eye accelerated rapidly during this period, as precise detection of prey and light gave organisms a survival advantage. So the better the eye, the better the organism's ability to survive. This selective competition for improved visual systems played a key role in the rise in diversity and complexity of animal species during the Cambrian explosion. After the Cambrian explosion, the next period saw the evolution of two essential eye structures: the iris, followed by the lens. The first step was to isolate the eye from the outside environment, which was achieved by the development of a transparent epithelial layer, now known as the cornea. Once the light detection system had been separated, the next evolutionary advantage was the ability to focus. Increased focusing power dramatically improved object localization. The first structure to develop this enhanced focusing power was the iris. Thanks to this adaptation, all incoming light was channeled into a single beam, according to the direction of the light rays, greatly improving the accuracy of light source localization. The next major development was the crystalline lens. This lens allowed light rays traveling long distances to focus directly on the retina rather than behind it. This enabled the organism not only to locate the light source precisely, but also to perceive the shape, depth, and other properties of surrounding objects in greater detail. The lens thus opened up new sensory perspectives for organisms with advanced visual systems. With the advent of the lens to capture light and focus images, the eye acquired a greatly enhanced capacity to gather information. This improvement would have generated selective pressures favoring the emergence of more efficient signal processing in the retina, going beyond the simple connections between photoreceptors and output neurons. To meet this requirement, evolution has modified the cell maturation process so that certain developing cells, instead of becoming ciliary photoreceptors, become retinal bipolar cells, which intercalate between the photoreceptor layer and the output neuron layer. This is why retinal bipolar cells bear a strong resemblance to rod and cone cells, although they lack rhodopsin and are not sensitive to light. Instead, they react to the chemical or neurotransmitter released by the photoreceptors, enabling them to play an essential role in processing visual signals before passing them on to the output neurons. Camera-type eyes offer a wide field of vision, usually around 180 degrees. In practice, however, our brains are limited in their ability to process all the visual information available at any one time, due to the limited number of nerve fibers connecting our eyes to our brains. As a result, we can only sample a fraction of the visual data available. It is likely that the first camera-like eyes faced an even more severe limitation, with probably an even smaller number of nerve fibers. This constraint would have exerted considerable selective pressure in favor of the evolution of muscles to move the eyes. The presence of such muscles must have existed around 500 million years ago, as the arrangement of these muscles in lampreys, whose lineage goes back that far, is almost identical to that of jawed vertebrates, including us humans. Despite the ingenious features of vertebrate eye evolution, a number of rather counterproductive traits can be identified. For example, the retina is positioned upside down, which means that light has to pass through the entire thickness of the retina, including nerve fibers and intermediate cell bodies that scatter light and impair image quality before reaching the light-sensitive photoreceptors. In addition, blood vessels cover the inner surface of the retina, casting unwanted shadows on the photoreceptor layer. Another tricky aspect is the presence of a blind spot, where nerve fibers that cross the surface of the retina come together before tunneling through it to emerge as the optic nerve at the back of the eye. This list of inelegant features could be extended to include other examples. These imperfections are by no means inevitable features of a camera eye, as octopuses and squids have evolved independently of camera eyes which do not have these defects. Examining the vertebrate eye in an evolutionary context highlights these seemingly absurd shortcomings as the consequences of an ancient sequence of evolutionary steps, each of which brought advantages to our vertebrate ancestors, long before they developed advanced vision. The eye has evolved in many different ways over time, giving rise to a variety of features in different species. Jellyfish, for example, have eyes, and although they have no brain, these eyes transmit information directly to the muscles for rapid reaction. Nautiluses have an aperture without a crystalline lens, adopting a different focusing mechanism. Flies, on the other hand, have many eyes, giving them a wider field of vision. The diversity of ocular adaptations continues with predators, which have forward-facing eyes for better depth perception, while prey have lateral eyes, offering a wide field of vision for detecting potential dangers. In the case of humans, they have developed the ability to artificially correct their vision using devices such as spectacles, enabling them to compensate for certain visual imperfections. Ultimately, the list of ocular adaptations is truly infinite, with each species evolving uniquely to suit its environment and specific needs. All the auditory organs of today's terrestrial vertebrates, whether reptiles, birds, or mammals, have evolved in completely distinct ways. Ciliated cells, the sensory cells at the base of the auditory organs of all vertebrates, emerged very early in the evolutionary history of animals. They play a significant role in today's non-vertebrate animals, such as ascidians, and can be traced back to the first animals with well-developed tissues, the cnidarians, like sea anemones. The auditory part of the ear evolved from a vestibular organ whose evolutionary origin, in particular the sensory cells themselves, resembles that of the lateral line, a body surface organ used by fish to detect the movement of fluids in water. The lateral line has sensory hair cells similar to those in the cochlea, whose responses are strongly influenced by viscous damping and are linked by a gel-like structure. The damping problem was solved early on by evolving the active mechanisms of the sensory cells and linking them via a gel-like structure to increase both their sensitivity and frequency selectivity. These two features have survived 500 million years of evolution and are common to vertebrate inner ears. During the Carboniferous period, from -359 to -299 million years ago, tetrapod ancestors successfully migrated to terrestrial life, paving the way for further adaptations of existing sensory systems, including hearing, from aquatic to terrestrial life. Thus, over hundreds of millions of years, progressive adjustments were made to these organisms so that they could adapt to higher frequency stimuli, first in an aquatic environment and then in an aerial one. It is assumed that the ancestors of amniote vertebrates had a limited hearing capacity for loud, low-frequency sounds, as they lacked a tympanic middle ear. The first terrestrial vertebrates had an auditory papilla that rested on solid tissue and was covered by an otolith, a small mineral structure present in the inner ear of certain animals, notably fish and reptiles, responsible for detecting movement and balance, and composed of calcium carbonate crystals. In amphibians, the otolith membrane was replaced by a tectorial lining that contained no otoliths. In all subsequent lineages, the basilar membrane appeared, freely suspended. In other lines, the basilar membrane showed some adaptation, with moderate frequency selectivity. Around 100 million years after the separation of the tetrapod lineages during the Triassic period, at least 5 independent developments of tympanic middle ears were observed. These developments functioned as essential impedance matching mechanisms for the efficient detection of airborne sounds. The absence of an effective middle ear prevents the detection of high-frequency sounds. This gave rise to parallel evolutions, leading to major differences in the auditory systems of tetrapod vertebrates between different clades, while ultimately fulfilling the same function: detecting, transmitting, transducing, and encoding airborne sounds. Paleontological, morphological, and developmental evidence suggests that lepidopsaurs, such as lizards and snakes, as well as archosaurs, which include birds and crocodiles, independently developed a middle ear, composed of a single ossicle. Firstly, in birds and crocodilians, the structure of the auditory organ shows marked similarities, such as the presence and distribution of similar cell types. It is therefore reasonable to assume that this structural configuration was reached or initiated at the latest around the separation of their ancestral lineages some 160 million years ago. Similar reasoning applies to Lepidosauurs. In Tuataris, which separated early from other Lepidosauur lineages, the cellular configuration of the auditory papilla is similar than in lizards. In Tuataras, as in turtles, there is only one type of cylated cell, and all cylated cells have the same orientation. Thus, the more complex structure typically seen in lizards seems to have arisen after the Tuatara lineage separated from the squamates. However, it is not known whether Lepidosauurs, including the Tuataris, developed a tympanic middle ear all at once. Finally, in mammals, the characteristic structure of the auditory organ, known as the organ of Corti, is essentially found in all recent groups of mammals, although there are marked differences between monotremes and therian mammals. We can therefore assume that the organ of Corti appeared before these lineages split, between 220 and 150 million years ago. This comparative analysis suggests that the evolution of the tympanic middle ear in each lineage had significant implications for the later development of the auditory organs of the inner ear. The reduction in bone size and the emergence of new configurations to form the tympanic middle ear probably improved not only auditory transmission in general, but especially that of higher frequencies. This new feature undoubtedly exerted additional selection pressures on the auditory organ to enable optimal transduction of information and its transmission to the brain. Over time, the mammalian cochlea evolved specifically in different subgroups. Over the course of several subsequent geological periods, mammals diverged considerably, and although the basic structure of their cochlea was relatively constant, differences in length and various specializations emerged. Not only did cochlea develop huge differences in length, they also developed specific specializations in groups pursuing different strategies for locating prey, using ultrasonic frequencies in the air, such as bats, and high ultrasonic frequencies in the water, such as toothed whales. For example, some bat species have developed cochlear regions where the length of the organ of Corti, dedicated to specific narrow frequency ranges, is considerably enlarged. These adaptations have enabled bats to better detect and localize sounds in their environment, improving their hunting and navigational abilities. On the other hand, there is no reason to expect mammalian auditory organs to be necessarily superior or more sophisticated than those of other groups. Each present-day vertebrate group has developed an appropriate auditory solution according to the evolutionary pressures dictated by the environment, predator-prey relationships, and intraspecific communication needs. Acute sensitivity and precision in frequency resolution, characteristics commonly associated with mammalian auditory organs, have evolved independently in all groups of modern terrestrial vertebrates, in response to their own specific evolution and adaptation. Indeed, some species of lizard possess auditory nerve fibers tuned to some of the finest frequencies of any vertebrate, including most mammals. Birds of prey, particularly owls such as the barn owl, rely almost exclusively on hearing to locate their prey, so auditory sensitivity exceeds that of most mammalian species. Echolocating mammals, such as bats and dolphins, exhibit a wide range of hearing frequencies, a characteristic almost equaled by certain species of frog, which use ultrasonic calls to communicate. In humans, although generation times are 10 times longer than in fish, the issue is not so much the creation of hundreds of new species, but rather the adaptation of a sensory organ to optimize the processing of communication signals vital for survival and hence reproduction. Whether the evolution of the human cochlea paralleled the development of language is a fascinating question that could be explored by future research. All living cells are irritable to certain chemicals, and this predisposition of cells to be perturbed by chemicals is likely to have led to the eventual evolution of specific receptor proteins to detect chemical signals, and ultimately to specific chemosensory organs and systems, such as the sense of smell. Olfactory capacity, used for chemical communication, is widespread in the majority of living beings belonging to the animal kingdom, enabling the perception and identification of chemical signals. The sensitivity and chemical range of animals' olfactory systems are remarkable, giving them the ability to detect and distinguish between thousands of different odor molecules. In the animal world, olfaction has evolved to enable the detection of signals from the chemical environment, which contains decisive information on the direction to follow, food sources, the right time to reproduce, as well as stimuli to consider pleasant or dangerous. An animal's reaction to chemical signals is the result of a combination of mechanisms acquired during its lifetime and innate predispositions resulting from the cumulative impact of individual experience and evolution through the generations on the olfactory nervous system. Evolution has shaped the olfactory system in response to two challenges: the need to explore a wide range of chemical information and the specific sensory challenges faced by each animal species. Generally speaking, vertebrates develop an olfactory system that detects odorants and pheromones through their interaction with cell surface receptors specialized on olfactory sensory neurons and organized in dramatic and subtle ways, enabling adaptations in response to major changes in environment and lifestyle, such as the transition from ocean to land and the predominant development of vision. In terrestrial vertebrates and insects, we often think of olfaction as a chemosensory modality dedicated to the detection of low concentrations of airborne volatile chemicals. Yet aquatic fish and crustaceans, while not encountering airborne volatile odorants, possess sensory systems anatomically similar to the olfactory systems of terrestrial animals. For these aquatic animals, odors are sapid molecules in solution. Olfaction is therefore not necessarily the detection of volatile molecules in the air. In this context, it has been suggested that during the transition between aquatic and terrestrial environments, new demands emerge for chemosensory systems linked to odor detection. This happened in a remarkable way, as olfactory stimuli evolved from hydrophilic to predominantly hydrophobic and volatile compounds. This transition granted terrestrial vertebrates an evolutionary option to detect volatile water-insoluble odorants. As a result, it is thought that the complex biosynthetic pathways required to produce volatile compounds, as well as the highly complex combinatorial coding that characterizes olfactory perceptions, driven by olfactory receptors, emerged suddenly in just a few 100,000 years. Comparative genomic and phylogenetic studies argue that chemosensory receptors were conserved across aquatic and terrestrial taxa, and that mammalian-like olfactory receptor genes evolved in marine environments before the first vertebrates appeared. These changes in olfactory receptors at protein level, altering their interaction with odorant molecules, play a key role in the evolution of olfactory perception. However, researchers have discovered that this adaptive evolution of olfactory perception can also be influenced by co-expressed olfactory receptors undergoing changes in copy number and protein sequence. Selection also acts on individual olfactory receptor families or subfamilies, favoring specialized adaptation or facilitating chemical communication between members of the same species. Finally, genetic variation among the thousands of unique olfactory receptor genes can lead to behavioral modifications in response to specific chemical signals. Thus, the combination of these mechanisms enables vertebrates to adapt in precise and complex ways to their changing chemical environment. An animal's genome evolves in such a way as to be closely linked to the specific tasks resolved by its nervous system, enabling it to detect odors and respond appropriately to promote survival and reproduction. Recent studies have revealed the presence of ancestral versions of synaptic genes involved in fundamental neuronal communication in various organisms without a nervous system, suggesting a progressive evolution of olfaction. In parallel, studies have clarified that the olfactory capacities of multicellular organisms, as well as chemosensory learning abilities, evolve from life forms not equipped with complex neural networks. In particular, prokaryotes have been proposed as model systems for understanding the evolution of olfactory systems in higher organisms. In fact, bacteria respond to volatile chemical gradients, but also use contact-dependent signaling. In addition, a unicellular but multinucleate eukaryotic organism, Viscerum polycephalum, has been shown to be capable of chemosensory detection. Studies have shown that olfactory receptor cells are primary bipolar neurons with a similar morphology between species. They have filamentous dendrites to increase the surface area for stimulus capture, and an axon that extends to the central nervous system. Dendritic processes are mainly of ciliary origin in most animals. Although the overall morphology is conserved, the fine details of olfactory receptor cell morphology can be adaptive, i.e., they can vary in a habitat-dependent rather than species-dependent manner. For example, the olfactory receptor cells of land-dwelling crustaceans, such as the giant thief crab, have a morphology closer to that of insects than to that of marine crustaceans. Crustaceans share a common ancestor with insects, and as they lack olfactory receptors, it has been proposed that these receptors evolved when prehistoric insects left the sea to live on land. According to this idea, olfactory receptors evolved because these ancestors must have been able to detect odorous molecules floating in the air, rather than dissolved in water. But a recent discovery contradicts this hypothesis. The discovery of a new type of olfactory receptor, ionotropic receptors, IR, has changed the order of things and opened up new avenues of inquiry into the evolution of olfactory receptors throughout the history of life. These new olfactory receptors are present in crustaceans, in which no classical olfactory receptor had been found until now. Since crustaceans were the first to appear in the history of life, before insects and before vertebrates, we can assume that these IR were inherited long before the appearance of the first insects. During development, the olfactory system takes shape from the olfactory placodes, specialized regions of the anterior ectoderm that share cellular and molecular characteristics with other placodes involved in the development of various cranial senses. Certain cell types of the olfactory system preceded the appearance of vertebrates, as did certain mechanisms involved in placode formation. It is likely that these two elements were already interconnected in the common ancestor of vertebrates and tunicates. In vertebrate ancestors, this system evolved into a more complex organ system, integrating additional tissues and specific morphogenetic processes to develop distinct olfactory components. Subsequently, the ancestral placode divided to give rise to the paired olfactory organs characteristic of most modern vertebrates. Thus, a major olfactory adaptation occurred along the amphibian and terrestrial branches of the vertebrate tree, resulting in the formation of distinct neuroanatomical structures expressing more recently derived olfactory receptors. Aquatic vertebrates such as fish and amphibians have an olfactory system similar to that of terrestrial vertebrates, but specialize for the detection of chemicals present in water rather than air. Insects, on the other hand, have a well-defined system in their antennae for detecting airborne chemicals, generally referred to as the olfactory system. However, this system is evolving convergently, independently of vertebrates, to perform this function. Unlike fish, amphibians have developed a separate vomeronasal organ, which specifically detects attractive sex pheromones specific to amphibians. In addition, they possess an air-filled main olfactory epithelium, which expresses a vast repertoire of novel Class II olfactory receptors that have acquired a role in innate reproductive behaviors. These observations suggest that odor interpretation depends not only on the odorant molecules detected, or ligands, but also on the developmental identities and specialized sensory pathways of the cells that detect these odors. Recent evidence shows that individual mammalian olfactory receptor cells can be activated by several different odorants, and that individual odorants activate several receptor cells expressing different receptor proteins. This combinatorial coding is also present in insects and fish, suggesting that it has been conserved in the evolution of olfaction. Consequently, there are striking similarities between species in the organization of the olfactory pathway, from the nature of olfactory receptor proteins to the organization of the olfactory central nervous system. Although there is a striking evolutionary convergence towards a conserved organization, of signaling pathways in vertebrate and invertebrate olfactory systems, the receptor gene families involved have evolved independently. These common organizational features span a wide phylogenetic range of animals. Such conservation also implies that there is an optimal solution to the problem of odor detection and discrimination. Either this solution evolved relatively early and was then retained in evolution, or more likely, animals convergently developed identical or similar solutions to the odor detection and recognition problem. The sense of taste is a specialized chemosensory system, one of the main mechanisms used by animals to assess the nutritional quality of food, helping them to make decisions about consuming beneficial foods while avoiding harmful substances in their daily lives. Unlike touch, vision, hearing, or olfaction, which are called upon in different behavioral situations, the sense of taste has evolved to play a primordial role in food regulation and motivation. Taste systems detect essential nutrients, as well as harmful substances in food, and trigger innate behaviors that lead to the acceptance or rejection of potential food sources. Most vertebrates can perceive 5 basic taste modalities: bitter, umami, sweet, salty, and acidic. All vertebrates have some ability to avoid harmful chemicals and seek out nutrients. It is thought that each sense of taste has evolved to detect and motivate the consumption of essential nutrients, and also to detect and avoid potential poisons. It is widely accepted that sweet taste evolved in plant-eating animals to detect energy-rich simple sugars, such as glucose, fructose, and sucrose. Bitter taste, on the other hand, probably functions to ensure that an animal avoids poisons. Indeed, most poisons are bitter, and most bitter substances are harmful, although this relationship is not perfect. The salty taste allows the detection of sodium, an absolutely essential mineral. When certain species of animal lack sodium, and this usually occurs in herbivorous animals, a powerful appetite for salty taste is aroused. And for many species, salt is consumed even when there is no apparent need. As for the sour taste, many have suggested that it is involved in detecting fruit ripeness. Finally, the 5th basic taste, umami, probably serves to signal amino acids and proteins. By comparing animals from different branches of the evolutionary tree, researchers have deduced that the sense of taste probably evolved over 500 million years ago. This would have occurred before the divergence of terrestrial vertebrates, bony fish, sharks, and lampreys, when their common ancestor, a primitive fish, developed a new type of cell. These chemosensory taste receptor cells, located in taste buds, are able to detect chemical stimuli and send signals to the brain via the taste nerves to generate taste sensations. Taste buds are the gustatory end organs in vertebrates ranging from lampreys to mammals. These end organs respond to a variety of sapid chemicals and transmit signals to afferent nerve fibers from 3 cranial ganglia: facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus. Over time, taste buds have undergone several modifications to adapt to the dietary needs of different animal species, which explains their varied location in these animals. Not only are they found in the mouth and pharynx, but they can also be widely distributed across the surface of their bodies. evidence suggests that umami receptors were the first to develop. Researchers have reported the discovery of genes similar to those encoding the receptors used by humans to detect the amino acid glutamate in the genome of the elephant shark, a species that split off from other fish 400 million years ago. Sharks lack bitter taste receptors, suggesting that these genes evolved more recently. Ancient fish were probably the first vertebrate animals capable of detecting sour taste. It is likely that these fish did not taste food with their mouths, but rather could detect acidity in the ocean using the outside of their bodies. Variations in the carbon dioxide dissolved in water can create different levels of acidity, which can be dangerous for fish. So the ability to sense acidity would have been essential for their survival. Bitter taste is perhaps the taste that most intrigues evolutionary biologists. It's the Darwin's finch of taste, engineered and customized to suit a species' ecological niche. Humans have 24 or 25 different bitter receptors, depending on the individual, each recognizing unique combinations of chemicals. Toxic bitter compounds come in all shapes and sizes, so it makes sense that the receptors that recognize them are diverse. The evolution of bitter taste, therefore, also involves distinguishing between different chemicals. The diets of humans and their ancestors are mainly based on plants, which are an abundant and accessible source of nutrition. However, plants have developed physical, reproductive, and chemical defenses to protect themselves from herbivores. Herbivores must therefore contend with various obstacles such as thorns, shells, and symbioses with defending animals. Herbivores have developed various strategies to overcome the toxic defense mechanisms of plants. Among these, a particularly effective and widespread method in vertebrate animals is the detection of bitter flavors. It has long been widely recognized that many plant toxins are perceived as bitter, creating a powerful mechanism for minimizing exposure to these harmful substances. By signaling the presence of toxins in foods before they are fully consumed, bitter taste detection helps avoid their ingestion. This ability plays an essential role in the survival of herbivores, helping them to identify and avoid potentially dangerous plants. The ubiquity of bitter perception in vertebrates and its complex role in humans have raised questions about its evolution. One of the most remarkable revelations of vertebrate comparisons is that bitter taste receptors are a relatively recent evolutionary innovation. While they are present in bony fish, lobe-finned fish, and tetrapods, they are not found in cartilaginous fish. Thus, bitter taste receptors must have first appeared in an aquatic species around 430 million years ago. This makes them the most recent of the chemosensory receptor families in vertebrates. The origins of the receptors involved in taste perception in animals are the subject of much speculation. Similarities between the evolution of vascular plants and the Cambrian explosion in animals suggest that the origin of these receptors may be linked to an important transition in plant to herbivore interactions. However, there is also evidence that these receptors play other roles, such as detecting nutrients in the gut, suggesting that their function as taste receptors may have emerged later. The bitter taste receptor family has diversified within and between taxa, with repertoires of bitter taste receptor genes varying in size across species genomes. Studies show that selective pressures on taste perception represent the most obvious potential driver of diversification of these genes. Fish have different numbers of genes, ranging from 1 in Amazon molly to 74 in coelacanth, but most fish have an intermediate number of genes. Variation in the number of bitter taste receptor genes occurs in different groups of animals, such as fish, amphibians, and saurians. Caecilian amphibians, which include limbless amphibians, have the lowest number of genes, while anorans, which include frogs and toads, have the highest number among all recorded vertebrates, probably reflecting their adaptation to variable lifestyles and environments. In fact, most frogs and toads inhabit both aquatic and terrestrial niches, which necessarily contain a greater variety of toxic substances. Consequently, their ecological needs should encompass very different requirements for their gustatory systems. For example, aquatic factors such as pH have been shown to influence the divergence of taste receptor genes. Most frogs feed on worms, insects, and other small arthropods, which contain more potentially toxic substances. It is known that insects often sequester toxic compounds from plants for their own defense, suggesting that anorans may benefit from the ability to detect dangerous prey. While caecilians are animals adapted to life underground, living in soil layers rich in organic matter, they build tunnels to get around. All caecilians are carnivores, feeding on earthworms, plathelminths, arthropods, frog eggs, and tadpoles. Compared with frogs, caecilians are less sensitive to bitter taste, as animal tissues contain fewer toxic substances. Consequently, we hypothesize that the lifestyle, ecological, and dietary complexity of amphibians raise their evolutionary pressure for a wide variety of taste receptor genes. Saurians, which include crocodiles, lizards, snakes, and birds, also show variation in the number of these genes. Snakes have low numbers, while crocodiles, turtles, and lizards have higher numbers, similar to many fish. Repertoires of bitter taste receptor genes in birds and mammals show great diversity. Penguins and cetaceans have few or no functional genes, while birds such as zebrafinch and white-throated sparrow have several. Primates, including man's closest relatives, have an average number of genes, with the gibbon having the fewest and the chimpanzee the most. Although toxins are a threat to all herbivorous animals, not all species are equally exposed. This variability is reflected in the size of genetic repertoires, which is related to the proportion of plant-based diets for each species. This trend is particularly marked with herbivores having larger repertoires than carnivores. The most extreme example of this variation is found in obligate carnivores such as whales, penguins, and pinnipeds, which swallow their food without chewing, resulting in a total absence of certain genes linked to toxic detection. Around 7 to 8 million years ago, humans had one last common ancestor with other great apes. If we look at the current eating habits of great apes, we can deduce the diet of our common ancestor. It seems that this species was omnivorous, feeding mainly on tropical fruits, and also included leaves and insects in its diet. Chimpanzees, our closest relatives, rely heavily on fruit for their caloric intake, with a small proportion of their diet coming from animals such as other apes and insects. Between 4.4 and 2.3 million years ago, human ancestors left the forest for the savanna and other ecosystems, and their food repertoire expanded considerably. Thus, over time, early hominids gradually abandoned the eating habits of forest monkeys and increased their ability to obtain a variety of nutrients in order to adopt a more diversified outdoor diet. Despite this dietary evolution, our need for fruit and our attraction to sugars and acids, shared with other great apes, remained intact. From a nutritional point of view, fruit is attractive because of its sugar content, which provides intrinsic satisfaction, as well as vitamin C, which is essential for life support in hominoids. The question of why humans are sensitive to acidic flavors and even inclined to prefer acidity has sparked debate in the scientific community. Signals from acidic substances do not provide much nutritional value, with a notable exception of vitamin C. However, this exception is significant because, unlike most mammals, monkeys and apes are unable to synthesize vitamin C due to the loss of a functional version of the gene encoding gluconolactone oxidase. The common ancestor of arthropods that suffered this enzymatic loss probably had to rely on a sufficiently rich source of ascorbic acid from fruits and other plants for the enzyme to become useless. It is plausible that the acidic taste played a necessary role as a guide to identifying vitamin C-rich fruit. In addition, the combination of acids with sugars could also have been used to assess the degree of ripeness of the fruit, using mixtures of sweet and sour flavors. Thus, acids are not stimuli for which we have evolved to react in isolation, but rather elements we have experienced in the context of the sugars present in fruit. As a result, sweet and sour flavors are perceived as synergistic in the fruit aroma palette. In addition, acid and sour taste act as indicators of fermentation processes which human beings around the world seek out and consume. Wild apes depend mainly on forest plants, especially young leaves, for most of their daily protein intake. Nevertheless, early hominids and modern humans have shown a preference for consuming slightly more digestible protein sources, such as meat. Although umami taste is not immediately apparent in fresh meats, it develops significantly in aged or cooked meats. Consequently, it seems that chimpanzees do not possess a gustatory system specifically dedicated to detecting the taste of glutamate or ribonucleotides, even though they can perceive these stimuli. The characteristic umami taste of hydrolyzed protein is mainly carried by glutamate and ribonucleotides. Humans have developed a preference for glutamate, ribonucleotides, and umami taste, probably as signals indicating more easily digestible proteins in lightly aged or cooked meats. Indeed, there is ample fossil evidence to suggest that culinary practices predate the advent of modern man. Humans the world over take advantage of a wide variety of plant and animal products that undergo fermentation. Our strong attraction to the taste of free amino acids and ribonucleotides may stem from a tendency to consume fermented foods, including lightly aged and/or cooked meats. This category of food would bring various benefits to the survival of our species. Fermentation facilitates access to macro and micronutrients while providing probiotic bacteria. Although it has been assumed that the pleasant taste of glutamate and ribonucleotides acts as an indicator of protein, many protein-rich foods are not particularly tasty or umami when fresh. It's the process of fermenting or aging these foods that releases the umami, savory taste of protein. Thus, our attraction to amino acids, particularly glutamate, as well as salty taste, may have emerged from our desire for fermented foods, taking advantage of the nutritional improvements and benefits of probiotic bacteria for our species. Humans stand out from other mammals thanks to a unique phenomenon, a large-scale polymorphism of the salivary amylase gene. This change in our genetics could be the result of our past history linked to the consumption of starch-rich tubers, and could have occurred around 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. The number of copies of the salivary amylase gene present in our genome directly influences the production of amylase in our saliva. This enzyme in high quantities and efficiency has the ability to rapidly transform a cooked starch, such as a thick pudding, from a semi-solid to a liquid state in a matter of moments in our mouths. The resulting sugar concentrations can produce sufficient substances such as maltose, which activate brain regions linked to taste and reward. In short, it seems that the human mouth harbors a taste receptor that responds to glucose polymers without necessarily inducing a conscious taste sensation. This receptor can be stimulated by the products of starch decomposition in the mouth, especially in the presence of high levels of salivary amylase. Human beings have a natural tendency to seek out the taste of salt in food. We find the taste of moderate concentrations of salt very appealing, as do other omnivores. But high levels of salt are considered unpalatable to us, as they disrupt the osmotic balance of our body fluids. Salt is a widely used ingredient in food preparation throughout the world, and individuals from different cultures consume roughly the same amount of salt every day. This similarity in salt consumption across cultures suggests that our salt intake is regulated by intrinsic biological factors. A carnivorous animal absorbs salt at every meal, while a herbivore can easily run out of sodium, triggering a desire for salt, which translates into a search for natural licks. An omnivore's exposure to dietary salt would therefore logically be intermediate between that of carnivores and herbivores. It should be noted, however, that humans lose salt through perspiration, which may explain why we have a slightly higher salt intake preference than other omnivores. Since our earliest prehistoric ancestors, the sense of touch has been central to our survival and reproduction. What we touch can have a direct impact on our ability to survive and reproduce. It may be a predator, prey, or parasite, a parent, lover or child, shelter or danger, a tool or food source, the ground beneath our feet, or the branch we use to swing. It's also the first sense to develop, with some fetuses responding to touch in the womb after just 8 weeks. Evolution has created a tactile system made up of different sensors and receptors, which together detect the qualities of what touches our body and what our body touches, such as weight, temperature, and texture, so that we can deduce useful information. Many animals, including some coelenterate, annelid worms, insects, and many other arthropods, birds, and mammals, have hairs or capillary projections that are richly supplied with nerves and serve to indicate to the animal that it is in contact with an object. These hairs may have been specially modified, for example, vibrissae or whiskers in certain areas of the body, such as the face or toes, to provide more sensitive discrimination between stimuli. A second type of tactile receptor, the subcutaneous receptor, is found in the skin. Receptors of this type are found in almost all animals and may consist of free nerve endings or complex corpuscles. Unicellular organisms already possess the capacity for directional detection of tactile stimuli, as can be seen in ciliates such as Paramecia, which move away from the stimulus source following mechanical disruption of their outer membrane. Sponges, the simplest multicellular animals, do not possess neurons, but they do have the capacity to respond to variations in water flow and pressure in response to the movement of their immobile cilia. However, the evolution of neural conduction has led to a radical change in the ability to respond rapidly and flexibly to tactile stimuli. Cnidarians such as jellyfish and hydra, despite their relatively simple nervous systems, can exhibit coordinated patterns of motor response to sensory stimuli, and many have a rich capacity to respond to touch. For example, hydra nematocytes are structures that provide a good model for understanding the mechanoreceptors of more complex invertebrates. In jellyfish, groups of hair cells called tactile combs regulate complex behaviors, including escape, feeding, and locomotion. The advantages of sensitivity to mechanical stimuli provided by hair-like structures may have encouraged their convergent evolution in several animal lineages. For example, the ciliated cells of jellyfish appear to be sufficiently different from those of vertebrates that a common origin for both is unlikely. Studies into the molecular basis of mechanosensation in different classes of animals also suggest that the cellular mechanisms required for tactile detection may have evolved several times. All animals with a central nervous system respond to touch. The nematode, Sanor habditus elegans, is an important model organism in neuroscience. It is the first animal system in which the entire neural network involved in tactile behavior has been identified. This worm has mechanosensory cells located in the integument beneath the cuticle, linked to 6 sensory neurons, 10 interneurons, and 69 motor neurons. In larger, probably more advanced animals, touch-induced behavior becomes more versatile and complex. The leech has developed a central nervous system with a succession of ganglia for each segment. Each ganglion houses 3 groups of mechanosensory neurons, all of which respond to mechanical stimulation of the body, but with different response thresholds. Tactile cells are the most reactive and respond to the gentle touch of the body wall. Pressure cells respond to more intense tactile stimuli, while nociceptive cells are sensitive to very powerful and potentially harmful stimuli. In arthropods, mechanoreceptors are located in strategic areas of the body where movement is most likely to occur. In proprioception, these are the joints, muscles, and tendons. In contact, they are the surface areas where contact with external objects is most likely. Arthropods exploit these strategically important locations in two ways. On the one hand, they use tufts of hairs called capillary fields, or capillary plates, to detect movement between adjacent body segments through proprioception. On the other hand, to detect contact, they use similar hairs but located in different parts of the body, with a particularly high concentration where contact is most likely and/or most important to detect. Spiders and insects also use hair sensilla for proprioception and consequently for active touch detection, where the active movement of a limb must be monitored. Among today's arthropods, only myriapods, crustaceans, and insects have specialized touch sensory structures, the so-called antennae. These sensory organs are equipped with a particularly large number of sensillae, displaying a density far greater than that found on most other body regions. Crustaceans have 2 pairs of antennae, while insects have only 1 pair. The generally accepted hypothesis is that over the course of evolution, insects are likely to have lost their second pair of antennae, meaning that the insect antenna shares a common evolutionary origin with that of crustaceans. Fish and amphibians have mechanoreceptive organs called neuromasts, which are arranged in rows on their body, head, and tail. These neuromasts may be present autonomously on their skin, or inside fluid-filled channels. The main sensory component of each neuromast is a group of hair cells that respond to hydrodynamic stimuli caused by water movement or variations in water pressure. In this way, the lateral lines provide a sophisticated sensory system for detecting the distant origins of water movement, such as predator or prey behavior, water currents, and the topographical features of the underwater environment. Mammalian skin evolved from the integument of earlier vertebrates in a complex evolutionary process that is still only partially identified. What is clear is that the first mammals, or perhaps their reptilian, therapsid ancestors, redeveloped hair as an adaptation of the outer epidermal layers of their integument. While dense hair clearly has a thermoregulatory function, the evolution of hair in mammals cannot be attributed solely to the goal of regulating body temperature. On the contrary, it is very likely that the first hairs were primarily used for tactile functions, and their subsequent evolution gradually gave them a secondary role as insulators. The main sensory function of hairs persists in vibrissae, also known as tactile hairs, present in all therian mammals, such as marsupials and placentals, with the exception of human beings. In cases such as the naked mole rat, a species that has lost its entire coat, tactile hairs have been maintained throughout the body because of their importance to the sense of touch. Many mammals have evolved to have areas of hairless skin, also known as glabrous skin. In humans, these areas include the skin of the lips, hands, fingertips, and soles of the feet. These are the parts of the body that play a key role in physical interactions with the outside world, and where tactile precision is particularly important. So it's not surprising that hairless skin is characterized by a high density of mechanosensory receptors that are extremely sensitive to delicate touch, which could contribute to the affective or social tactile capacity that could be specific to mammals. Only mammalian species have elongated facial vibrissae, also known as vibrassae, which extend outwards and forwards from the animal's snout. They form a tactile sensory network that envelops the animal's head. Species without vibrassae, or in which they were less apparent, were generally the most evolved representatives of their order. Consequently, having facial vibrassae was an ancestral characteristic of mammals. Many terrestrial mammals, especially those that are nocturnal, live in low-light environments or climb trees, and have evolved highly specialized tactile sensing systems via vibrassae. Research has focused on a variety of these animals, including rodents such as the rat, mouse, and golden hamster, as well as insectivores such as the Etruscan shrew and the Brazilian short-tailed marsupial possum. In some seal species, vibrassae have adapted to detect disturbances left in the water by fish. By measuring these hydrodynamic flow fields, these animals are able to track and capture fast-moving prey in total darkness. Deep-sea foraging pinnipeds, such as the bearded seal and walrus, have evolved a highly specific vibrissal adaptation designed to optimize their efficient search for shellfish and other invertebrates in the muddy layers of the seabed. The abundant, dense, and mobile vibrassae of these animals combine to form a kind of sensitive, tactile rate that enables them to detect and ingest their prey at exceptionally fast speeds. Manatees have vibrassae distributed throughout their bodies to compensate for the limited visual information available in their natural environment. The manatee's ability to move efficiently through rough waters suggests an overall body ability to perceive hydrodynamic signals to the sensitivity of its vibrassae, which has interesting parallels with the lateral line of fish. These adaptations underline the importance of vibrissal touch detection in the ecology of many aquatic mammals. Human fetuses begin to sense their environment through touch as early as the 8th week of gestation, contributing to their body awareness. After birth, the mouth evolves to become the primary means of discovering surrounding objects. But this haptic focus shifts to the hands as we grow older. It's not surprising that humans lost their facial whiskers over the course of evolution, as our hands took over as tools for tactile exploration of the immediate environment, while also enabling us to manipulate with skill and precision. Unicellular and multicellular organisms have developed different strategies to ensure their survival and communication with their environment. These strategies include molecular, anatomical, and physiological systems that enable them to detect and respond to chemical signals from other cells or organisms. These communication mechanisms are the result of organisms' ongoing adaptation to environmental factors and biotic interactions. Over time, organisms have developed adapted receptors that enable them to detect and respond to specific signals.